Good morning, everyone. It's now 10 o'clock and this hearing session is open. My name's Roisin Barrett. I'm a Chartered Town Planner and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out an independent examination of the Winchester District Local Plan 2020 to 2040. That is submission document SD01 on the website. This hearing session and the ones that have taken place previously and into the throughout May and into June are part of the examination process, which started with the submission of the plan in November of last year and will end with submission of my report to the council. At this stage, let me introduce Jill Taylor. She's the programme officer for the examination. She's working independently of the council at my direction and is responsible for all the administrative arrangements for the examination. If you've got any queries about the running of the examination or hearing sessions, have a word with her in an adjournment or contact her by email, and details are on the website. You've probably already been in touch with her. Few housekeeping matters, please. Mobile phones on silent, please. Can I also ask laptops, obviously, on silent too. Toilet facilities are on the second floor. Follow the signs. We're not expecting a fire alarm test today, so if it does sound, it's a real one. Out the door there and follow the green signs to the meeting point. For those in the Wickham room, which is the overflow room, out the door and follow the green signs again. Laptop leads, please, they can cause a trip hazard. Perfectly understand you may need to charge your laptop. Just when we adjourn and people are moving, particularly down those routes, can you just pull them in and make sure that they're not a trip hazard? There shouldn't be any need for anyone to walk within this enclosed area, but if you do need to, just note that there are trip hazards here. Try and avoid doing so if you can. Guidance notes, hearing programme and agenda are all on the website. I will expect people to be familiar with those. I set out matters, issues and questions. I have statements from many representatives and participants here today. I've read all of those and you'll note that I've produced an agenda for today that will drill down on some of those matters, not all. Now, because something isn't included, or indeed I don't wish to drill down on it, isn't an indication that that's all fine. It means that I have enough information to come to my conclusions on what I've already read. What's helpful to me, I'm testing the plan against the 4 tests of soundness in at this stage in the MPPF. They're at paragraph 35, and those indicate that the plan should be positively prepared, justified, effective and consistent with national policy. What's helpful to me is in your representations, if you're indicating that an aspect of the plan isn't sound, it's very helpful to me if you can keep those tests of soundness in mind and indicate to me how the plan isn't in accord with one of those tests of soundness. Now, my starting point for the examination is the assumption that the council has submitted what it considers to be a legally compliant and sound plan. That's my starting point. So that's why it's important anybody around the table who is of a different view points out to me why it isn't sound or legally compliant. Okay, I just want to set out my approach to emission sites. Emission sites are sites that have been promoted by through the local plan process, but the council hasn't assessed them for inclusion, hasn't has suggested them for inclusion in the plan. Those are called emission sites. Now, if the situation should arise that I'm saying to the council, you need to go off and look for additional sites, I will look to the council to do that in the first instance. So I wouldn't expect to talk in detail about emission sites at any of these sessions. Should we need to, as I said, I'll refer to the council, and then we'll take them through the process into the examination. Okay. Anything else I need to cover in opening? Because I'm doing a potted one. No. Okay. Thank you. Let's move on. Any housekeeping matters?
And we have one or 2 points which we need to pick up on when we close this first week, but it's probably better to get on with today's business and deal with those towards the end.
Okay, no, that's absolutely fine. It's quite helpful if we do a sort of summary at the end, and then I'll consider those points over the adjournment. Okay, let's move on then. We had a long session yesterday on meeting the need in market towns and rural areas, and we'll continue that discussion. And first of all, we will deal with Wickham and Knowle. The issue here is whether the proposed site allocations in the market towns and rural areas would be justified, effective and consistent with national policy. Okay, so you set out the approach to Wickham and Knowle. That's on page 453 of the plan, and that indicates that new sites allocated in the plan, that's W5 and 6, are suggested will bring forward around an indicative number of 100 dwellings, and then you've got outstanding permissions and you've got completions since what you're saying is the start of the plan period, which is 2020. Okay, let's just move on to Wickham. And are you suggesting, or you are suggesting, a main modification in relation to the introductory text? Does somebody want to introduce that to me, please?
Yes, if I may. The previous schedule of proposed modifications had PM 130 and 132. These deleted reference to policy WK2 in the supporting text of the plan. They're in effect historic references, leftover text referring to policy WK2, which was the glebe developed in the previous local plan. Those references are, on reflection, confusing and not relevant to this plan, hence they've been removed. I'm not referring to a main modification number, Inspector, because they're supporting text work, so they're not listed in the main mods, but they remain small consequential mods we envisage helpful in terms of legibility. So have you put those
in the additional mods?
I believe so, yes.
Somebody able to direct me to that, please? Okay, I've got it here. So
that's right. Yeah.
It's in the housing sources, isn't it? You've got policy W1. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So it's included as it's referenced as WK2 in the table Wickham housing sources. That reference should be removed because there's no other reference to WK2 in the plan. And there is a other element. The other amendment is to paragraph 14.111 of the plan, which is talking about the requirements of policy WK2. That's also fallen away.
Yeah. Okay. I understand. Okay. That's fine. And then in relation to Wickham, you're suggesting a settlement boundary change. those settlement boundary changes, so that's the Mill Lane site and the site at Southwark Road, School Road, just what I want to be assured is that that is the application of a consistent methodology, and your methodology draws the settlement boundary close to the built form. Is it Mr. Ayling, please?
It will, yes. Briefly, we believe that the approach that we have followed is typically to draw the settlement boundary close to the developed area of the sites, and that has resulted in us not drawing it in certain cases where we're unable to do it in certain case. But in Wickham, we have done that on sites WK5 and WK6 proposed allocations, and that has followed for consistency our approach on other allocations plans. So we think that will cover it. While speaking, I'm afraid I do have something further to add, however, is that on reflection, when we look at the proposed amendments to the policies map, it's not in my hearing statement, so forgive me. We have inadvertently suggested a change to the policies map to include the open space resulting from the Winchester Road allocation in the settlement boundary. That is an error on our part. It was never our intention to do so. Typically in other allocations, we don't include open space associated with development within the settlement boundary. We haven't, for instance, cite the tanneries and the vines in Bishop's Waltham. So it's in effect really a drafting error on our part. You could say, well, it's in the settlement boundary and so it would be protected by open space policies, but that's not the approach we followed elsewhere. We exclude those sites from the settlement boundary, so there's an error. It's in document SD05 in the submission documents, which is in effect amendments to the policies map. So apologies, it's not in this statement. It's only just come to light.
So it's the open space, isn't it? The Winchester Road allocation open space.
Yes, it's that patch of land to the east of Mill Lane. So a further answer than you were expecting, but hopefully that's cleared that up and you understand what we're saying.
So where are you suggesting the settlement boundary should be in relation to that? Because you've actually got, well, so as to ensure a consistent application of your methodology.
Yes.
You've got the open space, but you've got development just below that.
Yes, so what we're saying is that the settlement boundary should not be extended to the north to include the proposed open space at Mill Lane, but it should only extend to the extent of the built environment that abuts it to the south. That is where the settlement boundary should remain. It should not be extended over the open space. Clearly, the settlement boundary should be changed on the remaining parcels of site W1, which is the housing allocation. It's merely the open space allocation to the east of Mill Lane that should not be actually included in an enlarged settlement boundary.
No, I understand that, but can you see that the settlement boundary at the moment cuts across? Well, let me ask the question: is there development to the south of that open space?
Yes.
And is the suggestion that is included within the settlement boundary?
That would be logical. It is not at present. It is not in the adopted plan, but that would appear to be a more logical amendment to the boundary at that location.
Okay, so you're suggesting the change to the plan is on the map,
yes,
page 454, isn't it? And that's what I'm going to be concerned with. What you're suggesting is a consequential change to the policies map, which is a matter for you, but I need to be assured that those consequential changes are taken care of. It really makes sense, the that nuance. But okay then, I understand that. So you're suggesting another MM to alter the settlement boundary. Could I open this up to people around the table? Does anybody wish to provide a view on that?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Representing Wickham and Knoll Parish Council, I think that the first thing to say is that we have great sympathy with the City Council relative to settlement boundaries, because it is very difficult to see that there is any possibility of development within the existing settlement boundary, and so therefore those boundaries will have to change in some way or another. However, we are not particularly happy about the choices that have been made. And in fact, the choices that have been made, the two sites that have been chosen by the City Council were made by the City Council without consultation with residents. And the reason for that was we were only informed very late that these houses would be required. And we would have chosen up.
Sorry, Mr. Nichol, are you talking about suggested allocation number 5 and number 6?
I am.
Sorry, could I stop you there, Mr.
Okay.
Is it Holiday?
It is, yes.
Mr. Holiday. And I will bring you in at the appropriate time. I just want to deal now. Have you got any comment on the suggested settlement boundary? And that settlement boundary, you've heard what the council say, and what they're saying is that there's an error on the map that includes the open space for the Winchester Road site, and what they're suggesting is drawing the settlement boundary tight to the built form. Can I just ask you on that point, please?
Yes, you may indeed. And I would agree entirely with that.
Okay.
What we don't agree with is that they have not chosen the right sites around which the settlement boundary should be drawn.
No, perfectly get that. And I will come back to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sorry, one thing I forgot to say is if you wish to speak, if you just as Mr. Holiday did, if you can put your nameplate on its end, and I will endeavour to bring you into the discussion at an appropriate time. I'll know that you wish to speak. Macro Limited, thank you.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, we made specific comments in relation to that failing, which the council has noted with the way the settlement boundary was drawn. We agree entirely that the open space should be excluded. That is entirely consistent with the rest of the plan. We also agree that the other built development that was previously excluded on that plan should now be included. Areas of the settlement which are built upon should be in the settlement boundary. Now, the other point that we did make on this particular issue is because of how tightly the settlement boundary is drawn, despite the fact that there is a 50 home allowance for windfall development, there is no opportunity for that windfall development to come forward within this settlement. We consider that the approach to the settlement boundary is flawed in this respect, and there's a need to either look elsewhere for additional homes to make up that shortfall, or to reconsider whether there are other areas that should be released as part of a settlement boundary relaxation that would enable that figure to be brought forward. Thank you, Matt.
Does the council wish to respond to that at all? I've got the point on the windfall, but please, Mr. Ayling.
Yes, just to say, although we're talking about tweaks to the settlement boundary, that largely hasn't changed over a period of time. What I would say is that the council's evidence on windfall rates that have arisen in Wickham over the past base period on which the windfall study has been assessed is based on that area, and therefore we feel there's no need to extend the settlement, or rather the figures we've put forward for windfall are based on the area you see before you, and therefore we feel that that's justified the figure of expectation that is in the plan for this.
Okay. But you also make another point about windfall and whether it is specific to certain settlements, don't you? Which may just be worth saying. Yes,
forgive me. So we've gone through previous session a lot of detailed evidence to support the council's overall position on the amount of housing expected to come forward on windfall sites throughout all the settlements throughout the district. On the table and the introductory page for Wickham and other settlements, there is a figure in the housing supply table for that settlement, which is an approximation, a dividing up of that total windfall level with regards to what we expect might well come forward in this case in Wickham. But to be clear, it is not a target. It is just trying to paint a picture and recognise that there will be other sites coming forward in this example in Wickham over the plan period for the benefit of all parties to see the likely level of development that's coming forward.
Okay, I want to move on now. Thank you very much, Mr. Ealing. I want to move on, and let's deal with the Winchester Road housing and open space. So this is 2 sites, isn't it? And it appears to me, now I haven't visited these yet, but it appears to me that one certainly is developed on the west side. Are both of them developed? And this is the outstanding open space, isn't it?
Yes. So
the outstanding issue.
Yeah. So our understanding is the housing's now complete, or is sufficiently complete that that's done. But we do feel that in this case, because the open space or sports pitches as we're currently allocated have not yet come forward, there is value in retaining this policy to oversee, if you like, the delivery of open space or sports pitches, and obviously we'll go on to that in a minute.
Okay, so that's an extant planning permission. That development is complete other than the open space. What you're suggesting is the parish council is suggesting that they don't wish for playing fields, but would like something more flexible.
I believe that's so. I think the position has changed. We're talking about an allocation and a permission for some years. So I think as the position has changed over years, if you like, but that's certainly what we're getting from the parish council now. And our experience, I know there's a lot of meetings have been held between the city council and the parish council about what is the right solution for open space at that time. And without putting words in their mouth, it's clear that I think that they do not see sports pitches as being the right solution for that site, but want more open space. A country park type thing has been mentioned by the parish, but that's why we're seeking this change.
Okay, and what change are you seeking?
Yeah, so proposed, and this is a main modification 77. Just from our perspective, it's seeking to broaden out the type of open space that we can deliver there. I appreciate our discussions with the parish council and our considering of the deliverability of it. It is leaning towards a more relaxed approach to open space, and not formal sports pitches and pavilion as in the policy. So the modification seeks to have to replace requirement for sports pitches with sports pitches or other open space to retain flexibility. We know that's not the parish council's position. They been clear they don't now want sports pitches, but on balance, for the purposes of the plan, we think it's helpful just to retain that flexibility should things change again in the next matter of months or whatever as this issue plays out.
Okay, got that. So how does the suggested change to the policy relate to the extant planning permission, and is it going to be effective? That's the first point. And presumably that went through the rigors of a planning application. The requirement for sports pitches was there. That was meeting a local need. How does that relate to the need for open space, or the lack of need for public sports provision?
The original planning permission and the original notion, if you like, of sports pitches arose from the council's playing pitch assessment 2018 that did identify a shortfall in sports pitches in the southern parishes. So that informed and was part of the thinking there. The council is in the process of reviewing that playing pitch assessment, however, and so the discussions here about the deliverability of the sports pitches in Wickham is in the mix, if you like, as part of thinking again about what level of need there might be and how that might be delivered. It's not finished yet, but it is well advanced. I think it's safe to say that because we don't have certainty at all that we could deliver sports pitches on this site, that it's appropriate, if you like, to reassess the need across the district and look for more deliverable opportunities to manage that need, the extent to which is yet to be determined elsewhere. With regards to the open space, however, we do have a more recent open space assessment which shows there is a shortfall of open space in Wickham Parish, which the revised proposition for a more relaxed form of open space at this location would help to meet. So we have evidence to show that this would fulfil an identified need. You asked about the planning application. We've been in discussion with development management officers. My understanding is that the Section 106 agreement, aligned with that original consent, was included a payment from the promoter, contribution towards the provision of the pavilion and to deliver the facilities, but it is not so tightly drawn that it requires, for instance, for them to lay out pitches to actually deliver it for sports provision. So I believe we're in a position where we can flex with the current commission. However, I should stress that because we haven't yet finalised our position with what type of open space we would have here, that may need to be looked at again, should there need to be an amendment to the application and for that to go through a process. But we don't think that's necessarily the case. That's the advice I've received.
Okay, thank you. Can I turn to the parish council, please?
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Chair. A lot of what Mr. Ayling has said, we would thoroughly agree with. The position that he expressed regarding the playing pitch strategy that was published, I think, 2018, I think is slightly misrepresented, in as much as what it concluded was that there was no demand in the southern area for new grass pitches. It said that there was a shortfall at the time of writing, but as the plan was going forward, there wouldn't be one, and that any need would be capable of being met by reconfiguration of existing pitches. And as I understand it, the review that's going on right now, which I think he also referred to, I believe does not include Mill Lane, that's the site that we're talking about, as a site for sports pitches. So in other words, they are saying now that there should be no need for sports pitches at Mill Lane. Also, as I understand it from the documentation, there is an open space shortfall in Wickham of 3.49 hectares, I think it is. And so therefore, the proposal that the parish council has come forward with, based upon financial analysis and demand relative to sports in the area, should go forward as a recreational space in the form of some form of country park. For that, we had assumed that we would need to have a variation to the S106, and we're about to go into final consultation on the proposals, which we would then bring to Winchester City Council to go forward with that plan.
Okay. So it may require a variation. Do you know what the developer's position is?
It may be that parish council has been in more face-to-face meetings than I have, but my understanding of it, talking to our DM colleagues, is that they are very much open to a revised arrangement. In other words, they are aware of the direction of travel on this, and that there's not a significant concern being raised. But I will gladly be advised further.
I can't give you.
Parish council able to help?
I couldn't give you an absolutely full answer, but one of the signatories to the S106 is the landowner itself, Rooksbury Estates, and we have good close relationships with them, and they would fully support a country park and would much prefer a country park to sports pitches. So I don't think we'd have a problem there.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, Macra Limited.
Thank you, Mark. If I might comment very briefly on the Section 106 agreement first, because I happen to have read it this morning. I am of the view that, yes, it will need a variation. It does speak very specifically to the fact that the land shall be delivered as sports facilities. It also speaks very specifically to the fact that the sports facilities contribution, the £500,000, shall be used for no other purpose other than sports facilities. So in terms of the delivery of that infrastructure and the contributions, those would not be applicable were it to be used for any other purpose. Notwithstanding that, I understand entirely the parish's position on that and why they are looking for a country park element. We wouldn't object to that at all. That seems entirely reasonable in my view. But in terms of the assessment of local sporting facilities, that 2018 document that's been referred to, if we're suggesting that that part of the evidence base is out of date, and that is the reason that we're relying on the retention of this policy within the Plan 4 as part of WK1, I would question whether that is either sound, effective or justified in any way, particularly as we've heard that the housing allocation itself has already been delivered, and we are literally sitting outstanding on this parcel of land here that doesn't need an allocation to be brought forward on the basis that it is suggested, because there is already a commitment in a 106 agreement for a different type of element, and there's conversations ongoing between the various parties that appear to be sensible and reasonable. I would also add that because, again, the council can't be certain, as has been mentioned, on whether there is a shortfall in sporting facilities or not. That work hasn't been completed yet, and the old assessment says that there is a shortfall. Surely the council should be looking to allocate additional such facilities here to meet needs within this plan. And that's what we've advocated in relation to site WI24. I won't go into too much detail on that, Inspector. I understand your position on that front.
Okay. Okay, does the council wish to respond?
Very briefly, if I may, certainly the financial contribution that's part of that Section 106, it's certainly the intention is to spend that on alternative facilities elsewhere in the village. That's where we're at. So that's it's not as if the whole 106 and the arrangement that's been reached with the developers of that site falls away should we go for this alternative option of open space we're talking about here. I hear the points about variation of the existing permission, but that will play out, I would say.
Yeah. Yes, that does sound to me, having heard the wording, that does sound to me to be the position.
Yes,
okay.
And Mum, if there is to be a variation of the Section 106, it's important that there's a policy backing to support that. And that's obviously what the main mod provides for.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I'm sorry. Wickham residents?
That's right. There has been consultation in relation to this site in the past on a different matter, not related to the local plan. And the overwhelming view of the residents, the people who are using these spaces, is there is a need for recreational facilities, but not sports pitches. We're an ageing village. We have 28% of people over 65. We go back 1,000 years. We have no village green. We have a sports field, but that's used as a sports field. It's very open, adjacent to large roads. This is a peaceful 3.5 hectare site, which the village would use extensively for recreation and to some extent as a refuge from the encroachment of the 6,000 house strategic development called Wellbourne that is imposing on us and will increase the traffic into the village centre significantly. So if there had been consultation, the planners would have heard this from the vast majority of residents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I now want to move on. We'll move on to WK3, And this is, as much as anything, a statement of intent, isn't it? You've got the Wellborn open space. Its purpose is to enable open space for the SDA, Wellborn Garden Village in Fareham. Is it necessary? Turn to the council, please.
On balance, we think it is. We think it's helpful to retain its adopted policy SH4 in local plan part 1. The policy was originally brought forward as that new community at Wellborn was not yet fully realised either through a local plan, area action plan, or planning application. But it did set out, if you like, Winchester's approach to its delivery. So you could say that now Wellborn has an outline application and is underway, indeed, that this falls away, that you've got this settlement gap issue is addressed under a different policy in this plan. So what's the purpose of this? However, on balance, we think that there is still potential for Wellborn to change. I'm not talking about extending the boundary of Wellborn into Winchester district or anything like that, but things can change. And obviously, we're talking about a large development that we built out over a long period of time. I'm particularly mindful the fact that recently, as 2020, we had an application in for works to Dashwood, which, if you're not familiar with it, is just on the boundary with Fareham.
Yeah.
It was a associated application with Wellborn by the Wellborn developers for works in and around the woods, footpaths, bins, that sort of thing, and to change it to provide a SANG to associated with Wellborn. And the policy in this case, that adopted policy SH4, was relevant and we thought helpful in permitting that scheme, because it's actually the need for it was generated by Wellborn, and our approach to it was informed by that need. I think it's we can only say it's more helpful, but I think it does actually assist should there be revisions to the way in which, for instance, open space or other associated uses arising from Wellborn arrive. I think it's for the benefit of everyone. We're not aware. There's nothing on the horizon. There's no conversations at the moment. We're not expecting anything else to come forward under this, but it's still helpful to have that as an approach, as a statement for all parties to see where Winchester is coming from, in effect, with those potential implications and impacts of Wellborn.
How does this proposed policy, how does that relate to the settlement gap policy?
The settlement gap policy is obviously about the separation of settlements. This is more about the uses within that area. And if you like, the application that I referred to, you wouldn't see a lot of change on Google Maps, but on the ground, of course, it's changing the use of Dashwood. It's recognising it being accepted by Natural England as a SANG, and it's enabling that to come forward. We do have countryside policy, of course, that again allows for essential infrastructure and all the rest of it. And yet we still think that on balance, having this approach as a statement of how Winchester would approach such matters is helpful. Did we need it for permitting that scheme in 2020? Possibly not, but we do think nonetheless that it's helpful for the reasons I've outlined.
Okay, heard what you said. Macro Limited.
Thank you, Inspector. I fundamentally disagree with what the council have said. I would just start firstly at the title of the policy WK3, listed as Wellborn Open Space. This isn't an open space for Wellborn. It's not a public open space. It's not a service or a facility that's part of the Wellborn development. All of those facilities and elements of infrastructure are included within the allocation itself, as is set out in the Wellborn plan. And I have submitted to you, Inspector, the relevant policies maps and details on that front, so you can see all of that information. Now, the inference here, reading through the policy text as well itself, is that the space could be inferred to deliver public open space and services to Wellbourne Garden Village. And there's no appetite from any landowner here to bring their land forward for that purpose. There's been no conversation about that had between the council and any of the parties. That would be completely undeliverable. The council have stated several times here that there probably isn't a need for this policy because we have an open gap policy. And indeed, if we're arguing about the point of consistency and what is effective and justified, Inspector, we have settlement gaps across the plan area set out within that policy. Why is there an exception that's been made here for Wickham, where it needs to have a specific development site policy, which seeks in some ways to do the same thing? But in my view, Inspector, this seeks to take it one step further here for Wellbourne. It seeks to allocate this land formally as only being deliverable for open space opportunities or public facilities, when that's not what the landowners have put their land forward for and would not bring their land forward for that element. Now, we've been very, very clear in the way that we've promoted, and I'll speak ever so briefly on this, Inspector, because it's relevant, the way that we've promoted WI24, land at Mails Farm, that if the council want to have significant areas of open space here, a country park element that provides a permanent, controllable, defined buffer to Wellbourne, we can deliver that. But it needs to be appropriately incentivised, and there needs to be a development opportunity that comes alongside that for the landowner to release their land for that purpose. But as you heard from the parish council very briefly, and I'm sure they'll comment on it again a little bit later, they're supportive of that because they recognise the opportunity for delivering significant green infrastructure as well as housing in the right place that parishioners wanted to see delivered. Just a couple of other minor points here. This policy could be equally effective if it was reduced down to a very small area that just included, for example, Dash Wood, as we've heard. There's a conversation about whether the policy was needed to enable that SANG element to be effective and deliverable. Why not reduce down this policy area to cover just that on the basis that that is what it was facilitating in the council's mind? The council doesn't expect that there will be any reliance on Wellbourne for this land. There shouldn't be a reliance on Wellbourne for this land. It's outside of Fairham's borough. And indeed, it's not something that forms part of that strategic plan approach. So to me, I don't see the justification for this at all. I think it's covered by another policy in any event. It isn't effective and it's just not sound, Inspector.
Okay, thank you for that. Parish Council.
Thank you. I think that largely we would say that we would agree with the points that have just been made. I don't want to go over them again because they have been made. However, what also demonstrates here is that a thorough consultation of residents did not take place relative to the selection of sites that are going to be put forward for Wickham. In the last consultation that was completed of residents in 2022, the site within WK3, which is WI24, was selected as the residents' preferred site. And what the policy of the council puts forward at the moment is that it looks at the whole of WK3 instead of that section of WK3 that would be a small development site, which would have very good proximity on the settlement boundary to the village, would keep the village as a sort of a nucleated as opposed to a linear kind of village, which is spreading out to the east. And it brings with it advantages to the parish that we think are extremely valuable. In other words, we would gain control of that area beyond the proposed development site at WI24, which at the moment we don't have. And we think that that is extremely valuable because the settlement gap is considered within the residents of Wickham to be an extremely important one, regardless of whether or not it's Wellbourne open space or whatever it may be, but the settlement gap is considered to be very important. So from our point of view, and I think that NE7, I think, is the settlement gap policy, I think that that says that limited development, I haven't got the words quite right, but limited development would be possible given the appropriate circumstances. It certainly says that it doesn't mean that there can be no built development on the settlement gap. And so therefore, because for historical reasons, which we could go into if you wanted to. We didn't have a chance to consult on the new plan once we were told that 100 new properties would be required in Wickham. We believe that a consultation that took place in 2022 reflects what would happen now. And it's a pity that the City Council didn't actually take that into account, although they referred to it when they came to their decisions regarding WK5 and WK6.
Okay, thank you. Would the council respond to that, please? The points that have been made.
Forgive me, from the parish council.
Both. From the parish council.
Right, from the parish council. We'll be guided by you how much you want to go into this in regards to the previous correspondence and how we got to our allocations with Wickham. They're set out in the Wickham site selection paper, and I don't think, as recorded there's a dispute as to what the chain of events, although obviously there's different views on what should or shouldn't have ever otherwise happened. We're in a position where we identified sites at Reg 19 prior to the Regulation 19 consultation. We had the parish council's previous response in 2022, which was a short list of sites, but in effect it was more just a recognition of sites adjacent to the settlement of Wickham. It was not a detailed response. They weren't able to provide us with that given the situation in 2022. Our site selection process is outlined in the paper, and we ran with it and identified sites as for the reasons set out in that paper, sites that we considered were appropriate for Wickham and in line with our development strategy. And obviously there's different views on the merits of that.
Okay, and I've read all of that. I just wanted to give the opportunity of hearing a response. Okay, thank you. I now want to thank you. I've heard about Wellborn open space. I'll come to my own conclusions. Let's move on to the two suggested. They're both new allocations. One is at Mill Lane and the other land at Southwark Road, School Road. Let's deal with Mill Lane. We're back up north at Mill Lane, and the suggestion is an allocation for 40 dwellings. And what you're suggesting, sorry, just if I remember correctly, you're saying that those are deliverable in the first 5 years. Sorry, I'm just checking that up. No, sorry, developable. Coming forward, 31, 32. Is that correct?
Yes, and just to confirm that delivery timescale is based on the phasing policy of the plan rather than a particular issue or constraint with the Mill Lane
because it's
site
greenfield
itself.
site.
Yes,
because it's. Okay, so this proposed allocation sits beyond the existing settlement boundary. We've just dealt with that. Tell me the principle of this allocation. How would it ensure the rule setting of the settlement was preserved, and of course its relationship and any impact on the South Downs National Park?
we think the site is well related to the centre of Wickham. We believe that by limiting the allocation of the site to the existing site boundary, in other words, the Sheila site WIO2, that provides a natural break to the site. If it extends, if we were to, for instance, to increase development further to the north, as the land rises, as you move out of Wickham, it becomes more visually prominent. and there is an increased risk, first of all, in impact on the national park, but in any event is visible from a number of wider views, and that is set out in the landscape evidence in the site selection paper for Wickham. So although the site and the land to the north is in one ownership, we have limited our allocation to the parcel to the allocation you see before you. Like I said, the rationale is proximity in effect to the centre. We think that by limiting it as we have reduced the potential for risk of harm to the national park. And I'd like to point out Main Mod 78 on this, which includes some wording changes to clarify the role of landscaping as a result of this. Sorry, as part of this, and as with other allocations, to include the South Downs National Park boundary on the inset map, so that's clear for decision makers and all parties when the site comes forward.
What's the additional landscape criteria you're referring to? Yeah. Obviously, you've got the boundary of the South Downs National Park.
Yes, forgive me. What I meant was changing criteria 7 of the policy to add in further wording to about the landscaping. Yes.
Minimise any wider views and protect the setting of the South Downs National Park. What's the authority said?
It is in response to comments from the National Park Authority that word has been included, and we're content with that. We think it helps to clarify where we're coming from in requiring that landscaping, and we think it adds to the clarity of the policy.
And it's suggested 40 dwellings, isn't it?
Yes. If we've talked before about running from a SHELAR assessment through to an allocation. In this case, the notional capacity of the site is 47 dwellings, given its size. We have allocated it for about 40 in line with our approach elsewhere. It may be slightly different than that if a right application comes in at a slightly different figure, but we're not expecting it to vary by much. And we know that the site promoter is advocating perhaps a slightly higher figure, but we think 40 is about the right ballpark given the site's location and layout.
Okay, so so you've got site constraints you've got landscape site constraints, you've got relationship with the South Downs National Park, traffic impact.
We've got an initial assessment of how access may be achieved off of Mill Lane. Mill Lane we acknowledge is a narrow lane, and there is something to be addressed there. Hence, we have looked at how that would be accessed, and our advice from the initial assessment is that a vehicular access can be achieved off of Mill Lane, but would need a little work in terms of.
Sorry, and when you say initial assessment, is that? Yes.
Forgive me, I'm referring to the document in our Wickham site selection background paper provided by Hampshire Services.
Yeah.
Set that out. We know that the site promoter is doing further work to look at that, but in our evidence base, that's what we're relying upon. We're also obviously pointing to the fact that there's no objection from the Highway Authority to that proposal, and we've clearly set out where we anticipate it's clear where the vehicle access will come from. We are, however, when we look at pedestrian and cycle routes, again in the main modification, should point out there's a small change to how we envisage they would be managed through into the centre of Wickham. The submission plan talks about ensuring that there are links through to, and we name specific links through third-party land that it should be achieved. We actually, on reflection, think that's possibly too specific. Obviously, the opportunity's there, but it's not necessarily the case that is the optimum solution when a scheme's fully worked up, and hence we're seeking a little flexibility there through that modification to, first of all, supporting text paragraph 14.119.
And what did just tell me about viability. Is there anything that's been thrown up that would put delivery at risk in the viability evidence?
Yeah, we're not aware of any abnormal costs relating to this site, and our viability assessment has assessed the type of site that this would the type of development this site would facilitate, which we feel is sufficient comfort to expect it to come forward.
Okay, and then you've got another suggested change, WK9. Sorry, just let me look at WK9. I've got a note there. Retained surface water overland flow route. Now, is that too restrictive? Is that reasonable? Yes. Yes, WK5-9, little Roman numeral 9, retained surface water overland flow route. So sorry, WK5-9 says that development should retain surface water overland flow route. Now, I understand that to mean when there's heavy rainfall, etc., the water would normally flow where it would naturally normally flow. And what you're saying there is that should be retained. Now, what is the justification for that, please? And is it overly onerous in respect of other solutions that may be able to come forward?
Forgive me, I was misdirected looking at the modifications. I understand.
Oh, okay.
This advice comes from the Leeds Local Flood Authority when we were looking at potential appropriate wording for such policy. It's their understanding of the existing water flows through the site and how in effect the ditches and other water flows work. We appreciate the representations received that you might be required to do something else, but given the advice from the local flood authority, that's our current position.
Okay, how could you introduce flexibility in that criteria? That's fine if somebody else wants to come in on this discussion for the council. Would that be appropriate?
Hi, I'm Sarah Rajiv from the Leeds Local Flood Authority. We have historically had an awful lot of problems with developments encroaching into overland flow routes. And so we wanted to make it crystal clear that overland flow routes need to be maintained so that there's no risk of it increasing flooding on or off site. So that was the main focus to why we were highlighting it in this way.
Okay. So what you're saying is that surface water overland flow route should be maintained.
Absolutely.
Okay. Explain to me why that's necessary in flood risk terms.
It's essentially a floodplain. That land is where surface water can be expected to follow. So if you put construction within that area, you're effectively removing that so the water can't use it. That water will have to go somewhere else.
Okay, and tell me what your response is to the question, are there other technical solutions that...
There are. So there is...
And what are they?
So the option that we would be asking for, if that land was wanted, is we would be asking for detailed modelling. So surface water modelling to demonstrate where that water could be placed so that it wouldn't, so there would continue to be provision for that water.
Okay, would it be necessary to include that in the plan, bearing in mind what you've got, retain the surface water overland flow route as appropriate?
I would be more than happy to have a caveat alongside that to say, unless that modelling or other evidence was provided to demonstrate that alternatives were available. And I believe some wording has been proposed in relation to that.
Yes, if I may, we're just looking at the wording proposed by the site promoter here, who's also as part of this discussion, and the wording there is to add in the words unless modelling or evidence demonstrates otherwise, which I think we're now saying we would be content as a revision to that criterion, given what we've just heard.
Okay. Okay, I want you to, we're not policy making on the hoof here. I want you to think about that, and you're suggesting that you're going to propose another main mod there.
Yes, we'll come up with an appropriate formula of words. Which I can see entirely the point that you're getting at. There's some other way of doing it that shouldn't be replicate exactly what's there.
Okay, I'll open it up to the table, please. Would anybody like to say anything on this point? I understand the parish council's position. Could I turn to Blore Holmes, please?
I can turn to a few of the points made by the council. Just on that very last point, obviously that's wording that we provided to the council as a suggestion as an alternative to the wording of criteria 9. If the council are happy to accept that wording, then great. If they need to discuss that, we'd be very pleased to assist with any alternative wording. If I can just return back to a point that Mr. Ayling made regarding when the site might come forward. I believe he said it was based on the phasing policy and not particular policy or other constraints. That is of concern to us. You all have seen, Mum, our representations and our matter statements relating to phasing, and I understand this has been discussed extensively already, so I won't rehearse those arguments again. But clearly, there is no particular constraint to this site coming forward earlier is the key point from our perspective. And therefore there is an artificial constraint on deliverability of this site. Other points perhaps relating back to points made by Mr. Bennett and also by Wycombe Parish Council and the Residents Association. I would just say, if in terms of the site selection process, the Wycombe site selection paper clearly sets out how the council has selected the sites within Wycombe. If you look at the integrated impact assessment and the Shelar assessment, the Mill Lane site performs better than other sites. It may not be the site that local residents would ideally seek to be developed, but it does perform better in sustainability terms against the criteria, and that's a key point. In terms of other matters that have been raised, Mr. Ayling referred to the site access. Yes, there has been some initial work, but further work needs to be undertaken in relation to access and accessibility. And there is a natural gap in the tree line where an access point could be provided. and that's set out in our representations.
Yeah. Got that.
In terms of viability, there is no reason why this site could not come forward. Blaws is confident that there are no issues affecting viability, and they would, they are keen to bring the site forward as soon as possible. Turning to the overland flow point, I've just double checked the Environment Agency flood map for planning, surface water flooding map. There is no surface water flooding shown on the Environment Agency's map. So we are concerned with how the council intends to deal with that point. And I think it is essential. Clearly Blaws are content to do modelling work, and that would form part of a future planning application. But I don't think there is perhaps the issue that the council are suggesting there is on this site.
Okay, hear what you say.
Thank you.
Thank you. Macra?
Thank you, Mel. A couple of bits to start with on this one. The council mentioned that the site is quite prominent in the landscape. It is seen in views. There's a particular need to be very sensitive in the way this is brought forward due to proximity to the South Downs National Park. The council also suggests this relates well to the settlement. I think looking at the wider context plan that's within the plan, under the housing allocation itself, it's very clear that this projects quite far northwards of the existing settlement boundary of Wickham. I don't consider it particularly well related to the settlement in any way. We've heard about the issues here in terms of the access from Mill Lane and the ability for that to be delivered, because technical work to justify that an access is completely deliverable in a safe manner has not been undertaken at this stage. We're being asked to go on a supposition that an access that is suitable on what is quite a narrow lane with very tall hedgerows, poor visibility that does bend, and particularly there's a narrowing coming out the top of the settlement towards the site. We're being asked to assume that that is okay and that's deliverable. I think more fundamentally, though, the issue that's been raised in terms of this overland flow path raises for me several points. One, what is the extent of this overland flow path such that it doesn't prejudice the ability for the development to come forwards in a reasonable and a justified manner? Does it limit the development capacity in terms of meeting those development numbers? The council is suggesting that this is an established overland flow that is essential floodplain. How can we say that, based on the conclusions in the integrated impact assessment, that this site should have scored as well as it has done on those points? And note the council scoring suggests that there is no issue there on that particular point, or in terms of the broader landscape point that I've just mentioned. Why did this site score better than other sites in the process when these are fundamental issues that haven't been addressed? The point in terms of the public rights of way and accessibility, I sort of agree with the council's watering down of that, because to sort of obligate a developer to deliver specific routes is completely unjustified. I also have a fundamental problem with the delaying of various sites in the plan. I don't want to get into the development trajectory, but that's just for reference, Inspector. To my mind, there are fundamental issues with this site which bring into question why it has been proposed to be allocated and whether it is sound and justified on the basis of those impacts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got one other person who wants to speak. Oh, sorry, that's Blaw. Would you mind putting your if you're going to say anything other than what you've already said? Yes, please. Could Parish Council first of all, and then I'll go to Wickham residents.
The one thing that I will say, which I have said before, is that this was not consulted on amongst residents, and when it was consulted on in 2022, it did not do terribly well. And so I wouldn't be at all surprised that if there was to be a consultation, that there would be a number of objections and this would not be supported. I think that from a planning point of view, and as I have to confess, an amateur, it seems to me that the policy to develop this site runs contrary to policy NE14, which is rural character, because in that it says The impact resulting from the volume and type of traffic generated by the development will be assessed, along with the ability of rural roads to accept increased levels of traffic without alterations that would harm their rural character. It would seem to me that a development such as is proposed here would fly right in the face of that. It goes on that rural lanes are a particular characteristic of the district that have a historic as well as landscape significance. Well, we support that, but clearly what is being proposed here is an access onto a rural country lane, which some time ago, I think it was about 2019-20, Hampshire Highways made an objection to on traffic grounds that was not considered by the planning authority at that time. So therefore, we think that traffic is a significant issue. And we would not want to see the rural lane there and those that feed that rural lane damaged in terms of its rural character. The other concern that we have, which is that I believe that the developers put forward that they would like actually ultimately to go further up the lane with 100 houses on the site and maybe even further, which again would be, as far as we're concerned,
But
contrary
that's not part
to.
of this plan.
I appreciate that, but forgive me for saying.
Okay.
As to the floodwater situation and the overground drainage, we believe that if this does go forward, that the policy should be strengthened significantly. And it may be that what has been proposed does that, but I'm not sufficiently au fait to be able to commentate. But I would urge that the Wickham Flood Investigation Report of March 2015 be looked at, because the conclusion of that was that it is difficult to imagine that any new development can be countenanced whilst the situation of overground and underground drainage is not rectified. As far as we're aware, nothing has been done to improve that. And as a result, residents lower down Mill Lane, particularly at the bottom of Bridge Street, have regularly had flooding in their area where floodwater has been mixed with sewage and it has not been at all pleasant. So therefore, I think that if a technical solution that you're talking about needs to come forward, it needs to be extremely good and efficient in managing the situation that I've just described. And so it would seem, with the number of constraints surrounding this particular site, that there being a better site in the settlement or adjacent to the settlement, it does not seem sensible to us for this site to go forward.
Thank you for those. Wickham residents?
Yeah, just to give some specifics on the drainage aspect, the drainage route from this site, the underground drainage route from this site, goes directly to the line of drainage which goes behind the village square, to the south between the village square and the Meon Valley. The manhole covers of those have been sealed up, and following the 2015 report, because of backing up. And that's backing up from a pumping station which is on the Fareham Road that was built in the 1960s and is not fit for purpose. So any development, and the report relates to that, the Atkins report relates to the fact that no development should take place until this is remedied. Since then, 400 houses have been built. One set of housing is the Bewley development, as we call it, the Bishop's Garden development, where there is already significant bursting of manhole covers north of the flood area on the Winchester Road, where when there's heavy rain, the water comes out onto the road. The road is then flooding down to the bottom of the village, and in fact is affecting properties on either side.
Okay.
So there's evidence of a recent development which made similar promises to the developers we hear.
Okay.
So the drainage side, the access point is getting an access into a site from a lane easy. You just take down the hedge and you open it. The issue is getting to that site. It's the lanes local to that blind lane and the lane that goes up to Swanmore are all narrow village lanes, not 2 lorries wide. And as is the lane below the site, which comes round to Chesapeake Mill and then goes up to the A34. Prominent site for flooding and no easy transport, easy passing route for any vehicles. So it's not a matter of just doing the lane around the site. It would have to be all the way along that road. And then you would turn it into a rat run where people cut across to Swanmore. So it would increase the traffic issues. And remember, we're considering the site opposite as a peaceful country park.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, hear what you say. Okay, Mr Dempsey, Dunbar Dempsey.
Yes, landscape officer. I just thought it would be just sort of going back to the sort of landscape impact and the sensitivity of the site. I just thought it would be useful for the inspector to be aware that the council did undertake quite a thorough landscape sensitivity assessment of all the Sheila sites over sort of 2019, 2020, 2021. That was in accordance with published methodology produced by Natural England. Their approach to landscape sensitivity assessment to inform spatial planning and land management. That was Natural England 2019. We based our assessment on that piece of work. We looked, as I said, at a great many sites, including this one. And we assessed their landscape sensitivity, their visual sensitivity, so on and so forth. I haven't got it in front of me, but I'm quite confident that that particular site, with certain provisos, was found to be moderately sensitive. So we obviously rated sites in terms of low, medium, high sensitivity. This was definitely not a high sensitivity site in our view, because of its quite substantial containment, particularly to the west, to the east. It has been recognised and mentioned that further north it gets a little bit more sensitive. The land is rising, you're going towards the national park, but this particular site we felt was only moderately sensitive, and that it's specified in the commentary to the local plan what would need to be done to make it acceptable in terms of a good layout, careful attention to design. But we didn't think it was a bad site for development in landscape and visual impact terms.
Okay, and you've got what you're saying is you've got policy criteria that
yes,
will deal with those impacts.
Yeah, that was all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, we've got the locally flood authority here. I want to pick up on the points that were made about the flood risk of this site. Could you pick up on that point, and in your opinion, whether it has any impact on suggested capacity? And you can see the capacity, which is 40 dwellings.
Okay, so with this particular site, the area that raised those concerns was a small strip of land associated with an existing watercourse. So in our view, it was a relatively small area that should be able to be dealt with appropriate layout. And we did not feel that it would really compromise the quantum of development that was proposed. But we really wanted to emphasise the point that there is an existing watercourse there that needs to be retained, so that overland flow, that space for water is retained.
Okay. Thank you for that.
There's quite a bit of commentary on that issue in supporting text 14.120 for your note, Mark. Talks about the watercourse on the eastern edge of the boundary.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to move on now. Let's move on to site land at Southwark Road, School Road. Another greenfield site. Suggested new allocation again, suggested capacity 60 dwellings. You're suggesting an in relation to the title of the policy. That's just for clarity, I take it. Yeah, don't need to hear anything more on that. So again, we've got an allocation that sits beyond the settlement boundary. You've got all of those same and constraints with regard to the rural setting of the settlement and its relationship with the national park. I need reassurance on that point, please.
Yes, so the identification of the site followed the same process I outlined earlier. In regards to the capacity, we've looked at the distance of this site from the national park boundary and thought about what an appropriate approach would be to mitigate or minimise any impact. And there's some further wording with the discussion of the National Park Authority is included in the main modification 79 for this policy.
So those are all suggestions from the National Park Authority. So again, if we just look at criteria 6, retain and reinforce landscape buffer to north, east and south. And protect the setting of Southdown National Park. How far is the national park from the site? Roughly.
It's certainly not adjacent as a site yesterday. I think we're into, I'd have to guess, I'm afraid, and say okay. Over 100 metres.
No. Okay. Okay. And are any of those constraints, I mean, it's really the rural character and appearance and the South Downs National Park. Are any of those going to be inhibit delivery within the plan period?
We don't think so. We view this as an extension of the glebe, the site that's recently been built out immediately to the west. We envisage it looking and feeling much like that, and an extension of that. Based on that thinking, we've derived our estimate of capacity for the allocated site. The sort of layout design and potential impacts that could have in terms of heights and all the rest of it. And we're quite content that any impacts in the national park can be managed through the approach to landscaping as you see in the policy, and have no objections from the national park on that. There are other there is a specific issue about archaeology. If you wish us to go there now,
yeah, I do.
Yes. So we have experience of development in this area in the recent, the development of the glebe identified and highlighted the presence of archaeological remains to the north of the built footprint you see now. So that informed, if you like, our initial thinking on terms of what is the correct developable element of this site, because this is drawn from a much larger Sheila site.
Yeah.
We've also had that work has now been progressed further, and I'm going to ask my colleague on the archaeology officer to just give a little more detail on that, if I may.
Thank you, ma'am. Tracy Matthews, archaeologist at Winchester City Council. Yes, we support the proposed changes to wording of the supporting text suggested by Historic England. But further to that, the development of the glebe found quite a number of archaeological remains relating to a long distance Roman road, Roman settlement remains. However, nothing of national significance was identified on that site. And in fact, a number of the remains were fairly degraded in terms of their condition. That's not to say that huge amounts of information hasn't been obtained through the archaeological work undertaken ahead of that development. Further to the comments from Historic England on the Regulation 19 plan, the site promoter has commissioned geophysical survey and some evaluation trenching on the proposal site. Site conditions meant that not all of the evaluation trenching could be completed. However, both the geophysical survey and the evaluation trenching that's taken place have confirmed that the anticipated archaeological resource on the proposed allocation site is very similar in nature and significance to that of the glebe. Professional view is therefore that it's highly unlikely there'll be any nationally significant archaeological remains, and it's anticipated that the proposed policy with supporting text would secure, together with the NPPF, obviously would secure appropriate archaeological mitigation should this site be allocated and development occur.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, and then can we look at the phasing that you're suggesting? That's 13. Occupation of development will be phased to align with delivery of sewage infrastructure in consultation with the service provider. Oh yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Ma'am. So the original assessments by Southern Water highlighted that a connection to the sewer network at WK6 could lead to an increased risk of flooding unless network reinforcement is delivered at the rate of occupancy. So hence why criterion 8 was included as a result of that advice and in line with paragraph 124C of the NPPF. Further to that work that was carried out by Southern Water, they undertook an additional capacity assessment.
Sorry, and 124C is planning policies should support development and make sufficient use of land, taking into account availability and capacity of infrastructure.
That's right.
Services. Okay, okay, I understand. Yeah.
And further to that capacity assessment, a further assessment was undertaken by Southern Water in response to the Regulation 19 plan, and they've highlighted as a consequence the need to safeguard future access to existing sewerage infrastructure for maintenance and upsizing purposes, and that's included as proposed modification PM 142.
Yeah. Okay, okay, okay. Let me open it to the table, please. Parish Council, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Ma'am. I think that we wouldn't argue about the proximity to the SDNP. I think that the point that's made is probably about right. I jotted down that it was about 60 to 80 yards. Whether or not that's 100 metres, I don't know.
Okay.
But
I'll be.
But further than that, if there was to be further development in that direction, obviously we wouldn't be unhappy. We wouldn't be happy about it relative to the SDNP. However, our real concern is on the settlement boundary issue that we quoted earlier on. What this is doing is taking the nucleated settlement of Wickham, which it is, well to the east in a way that forms a figure, which is an outlier, which we think is not appropriate. Especially when there are other sites, including the one we were just talking about, which is actually closer, even though we don't support that either. At least it is much more proximate to the settlement, as is the one that we would prefer. And of course, there has been a planning application submitted for this site already, which I believe was turned down. And of course, there was a consultation on it, which received a number of objections to the planning application. And in fact, the consultation itself, I think, was failed to achieve a satisfactory result in as much as it was very partial and did not go to the whole of the settlement, which is a pity. So our real concern is the settlement extending eastwards. We are concerned about the archaeology. We're not absolutely sure whether or not there is anything under there, but in that being the case, there is archaeological evidence in that area. And so therefore, why build on it when there is another site which doesn't have the same constraint, which would make much more sense to us. As to the drainage situation, we've made the point relative to the previous site that this is a big issue in Wickham. And it has failed to be dealt with over a number of years. Promises have been made. And if you go to the Wickham Flood Investigation Report of March 2015, commissioned by Hampshire County Council, not by Wickham or Winchester, it makes it absolutely clear that serious work needs to be done in order to manage sewage and overground water flows. None of it, as far as we're aware, has been done. Lots of promises, and as far as we're concerned, we are very concerned that this will cause the same sort of problems that we've already experienced.
Okay. Thank you for that, Macra.
I'll keep it brief, Mum, because they're very similar points here. Yes, in our view, again, what this is a projection of a finger of development out into what is an open pastoral landscape. This is not a rounding off a considered approach to consolidating Wickham settlement. The fact that it is projecting closer to the South Downs National Park, again, is questionable when there's other opportunities to provide development which does not do that. In terms of a proximity, Ma'am, I did happen to measure it on the policies map for you, so it's around about 190 metres to my measurement. Do validate that yourself, however. But again, there's clearly issues here technically that, whilst the council considers that they could perhaps be resolved in archaeological terms, I don't have evidence to say otherwise in front of me. Why are we allocating a site where there are these potential issues when there are others that do not? And why was that not appropriately scored in the impact assessment and other sites brought up on that basis? To me, this site doesn't offer any upgrades, enhancements to local integrated infrastructure. It's not proximate to the new country park that's proposed at the north of the settlement, and it doesn't offer any other strategic opportunities for landscape enhancements. So to me, there were better options here available. I don't see why the council didn't consider them, and I don't think the integrated assessment was justified on that basis. Thank you, Mum.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Crowders?
Thank you.
You'll support it.
Yes,
You're the,
yeah, so I'm behalf.
okay, I don't need help. Okay, tell me what your objections are rather than.
So the only objection we have to the policy is the phasing. Obviously, that was discussed at length the other day. Obviously, the need is now. Everyone knows that there is a need for homes here, Winchester. I know on the opening statements the other day, the KC felt that there was a wish to live in Winchester, but we want there to be an aspiration for people to actually be able to live here. So yeah, in terms of the phasing policy, we don't think the council should be artificially suppressing the housing figures, and but yeah, when the need is now basically, I think it was mentioned the other day by Neem Sutton that there's over 1,500 households on the housing register at the moment. There's just not the homes coming forward. So our main objection to the policy is phasing.
Okay, thank you, and that's again in your evidence. I don't need any help on the planning commission. That's all in your evidence. Is there anything else that the council wishes to say? Okay, thank you very much. I'll come to my conclusions on that. Right, it's just past 11:30. Let's take a break until 10:02, and we'll come back then. Thank you. The time is now 10:12, and this inquiry is resumed. Just a housekeeping matter. I just want to air a matter with the council. We've got a representative who was unable to attend today. I just want to air with you a suggested way to deal with that. Now, I've sort of, it's a house builder. It's Taylor Wimpey. Have you got any view on that, the way in which we deal with it, whether it's appropriate to accept any written submissions or?
I mean, as far as we're concerned, you need to have the information you need to have, and if someone is unable to attend, well, that's unfortunate. But if there are pragmatic ways of receiving what they want to say, as long as we have an appropriate opportunity to comment, then we have no objection to whichever way you want to do it, frankly.
Then it gives, does anybody else need to comment on it?
Well, I mean, that's,
I think I'll come to my, bearing in mind it's a house builder, it's a developer. I think I'll come to my conclusions on the way in which we deal with it.
yes, I say, we, other than having the overriding principle that you need to get whatever you need to get. And
Yeah.
people need to comment as appropriate. We don't have really a strong view
Okay.
of how it's done.
Okay. Thank you for that. Right, let's move on. We've got a lot to get through. I'm going to focus on the things that I drill down to the things that I need to hear about. If we move on to Ravenswood Knoll. So this is a large allocation. It's a new allocation for indicative capacity of 200 dwellings. And what you say to me is that this is been through the rigours of development management process. It has been approved subject to the signing of a 106. What does that 106 involve? And what's the timescale for it being signed?
The timescale for signature is imminent. It's a 106 with the council, Homes England, and the county council. They are the signatories. The main matters out, if you like, that have been the subject of much discussion in recent months are the provision and management of open space associated with the works. There are, and a contribution for offsite contribution towards offsite facilities, sports facilities and so on. So that's where the discussions are at. We know the parish council are very much involved in those discussions, but my understanding is they are not necessarily going to be a signatory to the 106. It's just about ensuring that the arrangements are in place. All other matters are agreed in principle, and I think it's just about getting it over the line. I'm conscious I gave you this answer last week as well with delivery. We anticipate being able to update, should we sign that, we'll be able to update this examination through these through the course of the examination rather.
Okay, does anybody else wish to comment on that? Okay, this issue about European sites and the impact on European sites. Now, you've suggested a main mod, and that's in relation to the GI infrastructure.
Thank you, Inspector. Yes, that's in relation to recreational disturbance on the Solent habitat sites and the New Forest habitat sites. So just to give some context in relation to this, Natural England set out in their response that the HRA should assess whether there are any allocations within the 5.6 kilometre zone of influence for Solent habitat sites and within 15 kilometres of the zone of influence for the New Forest habitat sites. The HRA has identified that KN1 is within both of those zones and therefore recommends that a GI strategy is therefore implemented as part of the policy to mitigate harmful impacts on the integrity of the site. MM80 sets out the remit of the strategy in response to NE's comments.
Okay, and I've looked at the the HRA addendum, so okay, I'm content with that. And then there's another suggested MM to give flexibility with regard to point of adequate capacity in the sewage and water supply network. And that's because there are more than one provider. Is that the point?
Yes.
Okay. I understand that. Now, given this is potentially an extent, potentially will have got planning permission, could I just understand, and in that context, understand the location of this development within a settlement gap and how that was taken into account?
as set out in the hearing statement, really it's the allocation is reflecting what we understand to be facts on the ground. You know, with the planning application, we're relying on the process followed in that planning application, which determined the acceptability of that site within the gap, and that is the justification we're relying on in this plan. And clearly, it's in the existing gap, but obviously would not lead to coalescence. That is really where our position is. It's a reflection of the site, that reflection of the fact that this allocation is, if you like, catching up with a site that come forward outside of the local plan process previously.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Does anybody wish to make a comment on that, Macro?
Thank you, Mark. Just to comment particularly on that last point, yes, of course, this is a live application and one that is due to be formally determined with its 106 being signed. However, the approach and the consideration taken here by the council in terms of the effect on an open gap of the development of these 200 homes is entirely inconsistent to the way that it's looked more broadly at policy WK3, the Wickham open space policy that we discussed earlier, and in terms of sort of the general amount of spacing that the council consider is necessary to retain a gap between these settlements. There's a fundamentally different approach here between this site and its proximity to Wellbourne and how close the developments would be to one another and the appropriateness of developing up to that boundary than is taken in terms of that policy more broadly. That it's clearly an overstep in my view, both in terms of the way that WK3 has been presented and whether it's needed, as we've already discussed. But also here, this is a much more rational and reasonable approach. I think the council are entirely right in the way that they've looked at this at the DM application stage. It is a good site to be developed, and the amount of space that they've sought to retain around it is appropriate and will preserve the distinct identity of those settlements. The other approach, which is taken more broadly to Wickham, it is excessive and it's completely not required now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I understand. Okay. Does the council want to say anything for that, Mr. Ayling?
Just very briefly, all I would say is that the presence, if you like, of adopted policy SH4, the WK3 policy, has not in this example prevented a planning permission coming forward where the circumstances are appropriate. So I think it just shows the use and the uses of proposed policy WK3, what it's actually intended to achieve and what it doesn't prevent where circumstances are appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to go over WK3, but thank you very much. Let's move on to our intermediate rural settlement, and the first one, of course, is Hursley. And Hursley, we spoke quite a lot yesterday about settlements where you have indicated that neighbourhood plan is going to identify sites in a lower order plan. So that's the approach you've taken to Hursley, but of course you haven't indicated any target, if you like, and that appears to be, well, you explain. I think I know, but you explain why that is.
Yes, ma'am, that is correct. We haven't given Hursley a target. It's an indicative number of 20 dwellings to be provided via the neighbourhood plan, which is in early stages of progressing, or through windfall development. And in the case of this particular settlement, there's quite a few constraints in terms of it being covered by a conservation area and the historic.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. The constraints with regard to
the conservation area that covers the entire settlement.
Okay, is that the only reason?
No, also it wasn't originally assigned the housing number due to the fact that it was designated as a neighbourhood plan area in early 2021. The parish council have published a final assessment on their website January of this year. So they are making good progress. Myself and Mr. Fox attended a site visit in November of last year. The 5 sites submitted in the Sheila which have a potential development of around 117 dwellings, which obviously isn't needed for this particular settlement. And they've put forward their two preferred sites in this final site assessment, HUO 9 and HUO 10, HU10. They each have a capacity of 27 dwellings each.
2 sites, is it?
Yes, and I believe the parish council. Oh, there it's sorry.
Sorry,
It was.
I'll go to the parish council in a minute.
Yeah, so in the final site assessment, it was highlighted that 2 sites were preferred at that time in January of this year. That may not be the case now, but it's my understanding that they've spoken with consultants and they're in their early planning stages of going out to public consultation on these 2 sites. And I've been informed that they believe that the neighbourhood plan will be made in 2026. But of course, with the contingency that this could come through via windfall as well.
Now, many of the settlements have got constraints, haven't they? Many of them are close to South Downs National Park. We've heard about all the constraints. Why has a particular case been made for Hursley? How is that justified?
I think my colleague Beth was just highlighting that obviously the conservation area, it is a very linear settlement when you go out there, very historic. Got that from our site visit. So in terms of access as well, it's quite constrained in terms of basically obviously the way that it's built up over the years. It's a very large parish, but obviously the main settlement kind of core is basically where you drive through it on your way to Romsey or obviously in or out of Winchester. But it's like I say, it's a good. I'd encourage you to have a good look around there if I can, Inspector, because it is a really interesting settlement to walk around due to its linear nature.
Right. So you said is your approach based on any any capacity studies or anything?
No,
like that?
we're relying on the neighbourhood plan and obviously the work that the parish council have undertaken as part of that kind of assessment of suitable sites in and around basically hers itself.
Okay, and you said you allude to the fact that at the point that the neighbourhood area, for the purposes of preparing the plan, that was at that point, that was 2021, and the specific target wasn't indicated. Is that the reason that you're not?
Yes, that is the case. That and obviously Hursley itself, the parish, basically literally abuts Winchester town too. So there's the core of Hursley itself, the kind of main village, if I call it that. The actual parish extends as far as Winchester town, the boundary of it. So it's quite unusual in terms of basically you've got the actual core of the settlement, and then the actual parish is much larger area. And those much larger areas, in terms of the ones that abut Winchester town, we assess as part of the Winchester work because where they are related.
It just seems unusual to not have any target related to a settlement when you've got a target related in relation to every other settlement.
I think it came down to the neighbourhood plan process at that time. It started early, and we want to empower communities to basically bring forward neighbourhood plans. And obviously they've done obviously a lot of work now to basically refine that in terms of which sites the local the parish council want to come to, but I'm sure the parish council will talk to that.
Okay, can I turn to the parish council, please, Hursley Parish Council?
Yes, thank you. In fact, I don't nitpick, but there's a little bit of Hursley village which is not within the conservation area, and in the site assessment which we did in response to the Sheila and so on that came in, the last one, which was 23, we selected therefore to go into our neighbourhood plan. We selected sites in preferred order, if you like. So there was a third one. So H9, which you've mentioned, which is right in the middle, H10, which is also very close to the middle of the village. And then there's a third one, which is possible, but in that order, if you like, if we needed them for the numbers, which would be at the north end of the village. And so what we were looking at, logically, sensibly, I think, was not to exacerbate the linear. At the moment, we have a village that stretches pretty well from the north entrance to IBM to the school at Poles Lane Junction. And the village is either side of that stretch of main road. It abuts IBM to the east, which is private land. Therefore, you would look to the east. And what we have done, if you like, is pick out where it is sensible and where it can be accommodated close to the centre, close to the services, the village, the shop, the post office, the bus stops, everything.
Yeah.
What the sites that we've picked out are the ones where you can walk easily to those facilities. Whereas if you start going up and down the road or but much further afield, the rest of the parish is counted as countryside, even though there are hamlets.
Okay. And the capacity of those sites is 27 each, as the
That's as they're assessed on when they go into the last time on the Sheila.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the number that's allocated. That's the that's how they are assessed, isn't it? By Winchester. We don't determine that. They assess it to be a capacity of.
Yeah. Okay.
But we've known for a long time that we're expected to have 20 houses. It's been in. It's always been accepted that we should be aiming for at least 20 dwellings. There is very little scope for windfall, really.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? There's very little scope.
There's very little scope for windfall in the sense that the settlement boundary, you were talking earlier about some of the others, is very tightly drawn round the built, even the back gardens of some of the houses are not inside the settlement boundary. So that is very tightly drawn. So it would be very difficult to have, there have been some windfall in the past 10, 20 years, maybe the odd one infill, but it's very constrained. Whereas we believe that we can select sites, and the one that is HU09 actually was assessed for an exception site, or at least a decade ago, because it's accessible, because it's accessible both as access into its site and very, very close to the centre of the village in terms of residents coming towards the facilities.
Thank you for that. Mr. Russell?
Stephen Cox. So I want to start off with policy HU1 effectively sets a de facto target for 0%. According to the council's evidence, 20 dwellings should be delivered through windfalls and an approach. And as Councillor Earl pointed out, that actually the settlement bound is so tightly drawn that I'm thinking that you're being generous. I think might make one possibly within the settlement. So possibly, yeah, maybe one hand. So Hursley as an intermediate rural settlement actually scores at the top of the list, joint with South Wolston. And actually, if you take into account IDM facilities at IDM, which are within 500 metres of the core of the segment, it actually scores as a large rural segment. So, in our opinion, there should be a target which should be equivalent to the other intermediate segments of at least 50 to 60 plus the 20 windfall. The process of delivery, which has been talked about through the neighbourhood plan. Well, the neighbourhood plan started in 2021. I have engaged with the neighbourhood plan steering groups through the process, and it has been very slow. It was only more recently that there was a site assessment with regards to the locations around Hursley with preference. Now, Mr. Russell sits to the right of me, owns the land effectively around Hursley Village. So although those sites, the Sheila sites, have a capacity of circa 29 units, actually they can be expanded. So we're more than happy to work with the parish council and looking at the preferred location. And, as said, report states 8209. And actually, if they wanted to actually expanding that rather than actually constraining it to the plan. Now, with regards to the locations, the location of Hursley, obviously it has a very sustainable to Winchester. It has a primary school there with capacity of 67 at the moment. It's under capacity by 67 credits. So just from a sustainability, and it's a little bit like Wickham as well, from a village point of view, having younger people living in that location, which is a very expensive location, and IBM on the doorstep, we're talking about sustainability, walking to work, well, very constrained at the moment because the housing there is very expensive. And also the type of housing available is not necessarily that affordable by families. So the commentary regarding the conservation area, of course, there are lots of villages around Hampshire that have conservation areas. But again, we believe in working with the forestry and with the parish council that we would allow them to deliver one of these locations that's been chosen.
Okay.
So with regards to availability of land, Mr. Russell state that all of the land around Thursday that is in his ownership is available for development immediately.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So the council's, I just want to be very clear on the council's position is that there's no targets, hearing about the facility services, etc. There's no target because of the constraints that are in.
Well, I think it's not only the constraints, it's also the neighbourhood plan process that we don't want to undermine. We want to support parish councils coming forward neighbourhood plans, and for us actually to set a target at this stage, basically, I just don't think it's appropriate. Like I say, the work that the parish council have done, site selection is really good. It's available on their website. It's encouraging, obviously, the landowner obviously said sites are available. Thank you. That's really good to confirm. That's much really.
Okay, so sorry, I just, so one is the constraints, but the other one is the timing with the neighbourhood plan and when it's coming forward.
That's correct.
And in relation to the other, for example, Denmead, Alsford.
Yeah, like I said, we are trying our best to be consistent, but obviously it's also a professional judgment about the settlement itself. And like I say, I think obviously you will no doubt go to Hursley, but I encourage you to do that. And it was really beneficial when we did that guided walk round with the parish council, just to do with the linear nature of it and how obviously it could expand, particularly with the access roads where they would actually come out. And it does have a lot of through traffic basically coming out onto that main road. It is an immensely busy road. So there are issues around basically this settlement compared to perhaps New Alsford and places like that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Russell.
Yes, ma'am. So where is the evidence base regarding the access, etc., and the issues regarding access onto the A road? Because there isn't any, as far as I'm aware. And with regards to the neighbourhood plan, it started in 2021, and again, it went very quiet for 4 years. There isn't a plan, there isn't a consultant which has actually been employed by the neighbourhood plan steering group either. So there's nobody the activeness of this neighbourhood plan is in question. So all I would say is if they're from an allocation point of view, if you are relying on this to be delivered through the neighbourhood plan, I would query that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Yes, I'm on that steering group. The parish council, the 3 members of the parish council, well, 2 planning consultants, because one happens to live in the village. He's not a planning consultant for us, but he lives locally. He does his work on the other side of the district. And 2 further residents. And that group has been working on this together with the planning consultant. And that's where we got to. The last thing was the the response to the site assessment, where we identified the sites that, from our point of view, were the preferred sites to start with, 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
And we hope that the plan, once this round is finished for the local plan, we hope that the neighbourhood plan for us, which will be working in with the next one as it goes, would be made in 26. And will be consulted, sorry, this autumn. What we've got so far will be consulted in the autumn, and then we hope that the whole plan will be made in 26.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Do you want to?
Just if I could add, you heard from New Alresford yesterday. Their neighbourhood plan basically is going to cover a wide range of issues. They're doing design codes, they're doing green spaces and things like that. So I think it's obviously the extent that the neighbourhood plan, neighbourhood plans can be different things. They can have one policy, they can have 10 policy. New Alresford are obviously they want to include everything in theirs. Whereas I think in this case, it's going to be very focused in terms of its content.
Okay. Thank you for that. So let's move on to Otterbourne.
No, sorry, Mum. If I could just so just to round off, I say we are more than happy to work with the neighbourhood plan, but I think it's a target that they should have to focus on with regards to where the housing's going, as opposed to and also a type. Yeah,
I understand the point. Thank you very much, Miss. I'm sorry, I know you're not Mr. Russell, but thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Otterbourne, and what you're proposing here is an allocation, new allocation again, indicative capacity for 55 homes, and this is a call it frontage site, maybe, on the main road. And what you're suggesting is that development can take place, that's the old forge, isn't it? The old forge, roughly in line with the built development either side. So would somebody like to introduce this policy, please? And then can you go on to talk about the archaeology? Tell me about the archaeology and whether that is a constraint. You've also got a number of other constraints. You've got a number of listed buildings, etc.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Mum. So yeah, as we set out in our hearing statements, Otterbourne is an intermediate rural settlement, and as you said, it is allocated for 55 dwellings.
Yeah.
In the target of 50 to 60 dwellings. The allocation OTO1, it is in a sustainable location, right in the middle of the settlement.
Yeah.
It's adjacent to existing residential area, and as you said, it's in walking distance to the shops, pubs, the primary school, and open space. It also gifts just under 3 hectares of land back as open space to the parish council, and it is supported very much by the parish council in that it provides 2 and 3 bed homes for the village, which is very much needed, and that's what's required. In terms of the archaeology.
Sorry, can you just tell me, have you got, what's the evidence in terms of the numbers? So you're suggesting 55 on this site. What's the evidence there?
Yeah, of course. So it was initially put forward as an indicative target in the Sheelar as 106 dwellings. However, Mr. Agnew from Gladman Developments, they're promoting the site. They put forward.
I'm sorry, would you mind talking into the microphone?
Sorry.
They're not very good.
Yes, we have the site promoted.
The Sheelar indicative capacity was
106.
Okay.
The land was then put forward by Gladman Development, who are here today, for a part site, which was very much welcomed by the parish council. And so the capacity was set by the promoters for 55 dwellings, ensuring that the footpath remained and that land was gifted back to the parish council.
Okay, and have you got, what's the evidence for that? Have you got a layout or?
We do have a layout, yes, and it's indicative that the residential development sits on about 1.9 hectares of the site, which is in line with the 30 dwelling per hectare tier for the settlement of Otterbourne.
I understand. Okay, and then archaeology, please.
Thank you, ma'am. On this site, as you'll see in the hearing statement submitted by the council, it's not believed that archaeology is an overriding issue on this site. Don't believe it's a barrier to development necessarily. And we do believe that the archaeology on the site will be conserved appropriate to its significance. Now, further to that, just to expand on that, is the site has the predicted alignment of a Roman road passing through it. However, to date, no clear evidence for that road has been identified, and there has been a geophysical survey undertaken on the site previously. There's been sand extraction on at least part of the site, and it could well be found to be more extensive than has been mapped on historic mapping. The proposed amendments to the policy for this site and supporting text from Historic England we are supportive of, as that brings archaeology clearly into early considerations for the development of the site if it were to be allocated, and allow for design issues to be resolved if any remains of significance was found, or their mitigation through the appropriate planning process. Thank you.
Okay, and indeed, you're suggesting an addition to, well, first of all, the boundary to Southland National Park, and then you're suggesting some wording be included in the supporting text. Given what you've said, should that be within policy?
There is a new criteria, basically just after the supporting text, ma'am.
Oh, yes,
basically on 74, it goes into 75. So basically there is a new criteria on archaeological kind of significance.
Investigate the archaeology of the site and take the results into account in planning the future of the site, preserving in situ, excavating or recording as appropriate important finds so as to prevent damage to the heritage of the site.
Yeah. That's very much in line with other policies that we've got, and obviously it's all to do with the design process. It comes back to the design process.
Okay, thank you. I don't need any further help with that. Let's move on to South Wanston, and this settlement, new allocated sites 40. Sorry? No. Sorry, South Wanston, you're suggesting 40 new allocated dwellings. I'm sorry. Did anyone want to contribute to Ottingbourne? I'm sorry. Do you mind if I just go back? Sorry, I was aware that somebody did want to. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to point out that the parish council is fully in support of this particular application.
Would you mind speaking into the microphones? They really aren't. That's perfect. Yeah. Thank you very much.
The parish council is very much in favour of this. It develops the site in a constructive way, giving accommodation to what we feel is required in the village, because we are very hopeful of the 2 and 3 bedroom allocation, because that enables people to stay within the village that have grown up there. And we need to support villages as much as we can. The only criteria that we are slightly worried about is the traffic flow, because that's a main road and it's its saturation point, particularly when the M3 goes on to diversion. But on the whole, we're supportive.
Sorry, I just want to recap to ensure that I understand. You are generally supportive, but you've set out those concerns.
Yes.
No, I understand. Thank you very much for that. Phillips Land.
I'll bring it forward. Sorry, I just wanted to sort of raise the point that I know we've discussed in earlier sessions as to regards where the numbers for these villages have come from, and we would question whether actually where the 50 to 60 dwellings has come from in the first place, and whether there should be additional sites that are put forward. There are numerous colleagues next to me, and the fact that windfall development is stated, whether it's relied upon or otherwise within the local plan, 20 dwellings is identified, which would take the total up to 77, I believe, for Otterbourne. But going through the data that we've provided in our previous submissions, they're not going to deliver. And also, a reliance on windfall doesn't deliver anything else wider for the community. Affordable housing, for example, which is actually a big problem in Otterbourne. So there are sites available. Where has the restriction on 50 to 60 come from? And should other sites be allocated in addition to?
Okay. Thank you. Gladman?
I'll try and keep this very brief, as it's more in support of, just to reiterate everything that the council said, we are in support of the proposed modification to the policy if that's required. But as the promoters of the site. Is it, sorry, I'm saying that we just wanted to reiterate our support for what the council said in terms of the policy change, that if that's necessary, we could be on board with that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Does the council want to comment on anything that's been said? I think you've said it before. Okay, thank you. Let's move on. I just sorry for that. I just wanted to give the opportunity. I know that somebody was here and very much wanted to talk to that from my reading of the reps. Okay, South Wanston. So you're suggesting provision in this settlement is going to be in the region of 66, 40 of which will be on a new allocation. Now, I've looked at the settlement boundary. You're suggesting a settlement boundary change. I've looked at that. I've read the evidence. Is there anything that you would specifically like to address on that? I don't need any more help on that. I understand the genesis of it. Okay. So let's move on to the proposed allocation, which is very close to that, isn't it? So again, the only thing I want to know now, the provision for off-site infrastructure needs. Could you talk me through that, please?
Yes, in general terms, the statutory undertakers were consulted as part of the Regulation 18, as well as via our general engagement with them as part of the infrastructure delivery plan and statements of common ground that have subsequently evolved. And they did not indicate any constraints to development. I don't know if you want to go into some
this
question
is a comment
about
from the ICB, isn't it? Oh.
I wasn't specifically referring to that. I was just referring to something that the parish council have raised in their hearing statements about
yes.
Off-site infrastructure.
Continue.
So most of the requirements referred to in that response will be dealt with as part of the normal planning application process. The Education Authority, you'll have seen their response, and there may be a requirement for some contribution in terms of that. There have been raised some issues regarding water supply and sewage disposal and drainage. which is tied up with the construction of pipeline from southern Scotland, which I know you'll be discussing later. Did you want to discuss that any further?
Where is this dealt with in policy? So this is policy SW1. So other infrastructure, yeah.
It is other infrastructure. There's the connection to the point of nearest point of adequate capacity in the sewage and water supply network.
Yeah.
And or make arrangements, which is criteria X. And then criteria X2 is the general requirement to contribute to infrastructure needed to make development acceptable in planning terms.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
And there's also the general modification that we're proposing about taking on board the ICB's comments.
Yeah.
We are not planning a particular modification in that in respect of South Wonston. No. That has not been one of the ones identified.
Okay. Is there anything else that you wish to say on that? I've read the evidence on this. I don't need any further help. Would anyone like to say anything on this? South Wonston Parish Council, please.
Thank you, Ma'am. Can everyone hear me? Good.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say with respect to the infrastructure that it's by no means certain that Southern Water will complete its operations in time for the suitable development in 2030. I've received no evidence that it is going to be finished, and there are additional problems in that the pipeline is pressurized, and that pressure may have to be reduced at certain times in the future. And this will mean that sewage will not exit so well as it would have done had it been at full pressure. So that's one point. The other thing I would like to say is that I think the policy is very inadequate in relation to infrastructure. It could do with a lot more detail. I know this can be resolved at planning application stage, but I do feel for the benefit of potential developers that they could do with knowing a bit more about what is required, because South Wonston is very poorly served on a number of fronts. And I would like to see more things being offered in that line. Won't waffle, sorry. The other thing I want to say is that the allocation is rejected by the parish council. We rejected all the Sheila sites. They all have problems. There are no alternatives. Basically, we've got here a perfectly good piece of agricultural land with good soil, which could be used for growing food. And for many years, the parish council have sought to have its own allotments and its own orchard facility. And yet again, it looks as if we're losing out to other development. It is almost impossible for us to buy land in this area. And as you will know, we are obliged to a certain extent to provide allotments, and we have not been able to do so. And I also think council will find here that there will be vigorous objection to any planning application on that site. Thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you very much. Could I turn to Landacre, please, Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Ma'am. The comments I've had just to add to what the parish council have just been talking about. My comments do relate also to Sutton Scotney, to policy SU01.
Yeah.
But I'll stick, rather than repeat myself, and for brevity, perhaps my comments can be taken into consideration there as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, it's really just in terms of the sewage treatment infrastructure. We know that there's existing problems with sewer flooding, so hopefully the proposed works will address that. But it's equally, of course, important for nutrient neutrality. We know there are nitrates and phosphates risks on the River Itchen, so it's as much about that as it is about addressing the local issue, if you like, of flooding. But I think certainly from my readings, Ma'am, I haven't seen, there isn't particular certainty in the evidence as far as I've seen that the works will be delivered on time. Now, in terms of timings, so it's really to do the hairstock works. And in terms of the statement of common ground between the council and Southern Water, SD08K, Mum, you're probably aware of that. The works are targeted to be completed in 2025 to 2030. Now, in terms of SW01, 40 houses to be delivered over a period of a couple of years to start in 2031. So you have a period of time for the works, and then you have pretty much straight off the back of it, commencement of, well, 20 houses to be delivered in the following year. That's pretty ambitious to me, I would suggest. We all know how long the planning process can take, the lead-in periods, even with a very well resourced and effective planning department as they have in Winchester. You've still got at least, I'd say, 2 or 3 years to get the application approved, to outline reserve matters conditions on site. So you've got a 3-year period. So if you have these works completed, let's say even in 2029, are you actually going to deliver 20 houses in 2031? So that's really my key point, Ma'am, that it's really about not wanting to repeat conversations on delivery and so on and timings as you've had earlier in the week, but it's very much, it's so fundamental. The works are on the critical path to ensure that this allocation is secured in the time it's meant to, Ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, turn to the council, please. This is a critical issue about the sewage treatment works.
Yes, no doubt we'll touch on this in Sutton, Scotland, so we might as well deal with it now,
Yeah,
if that's okay.
we will deal with
Yeah.
it now, okay? You
Yeah.
can all contribute.
We've been in regular dialogue with Southern Water about the pipeline, the progress that's been made. The pipeline's in the ground. We understand that they are now testing flows through it. So the pipeline is in the ground. So that's the new pipeline basically from Sutton, Scotland. It comes down to South Wonston. And basically they are planning works at South Wonston, and from South Wonston it goes to the Hairstock pumping station. We have a map, Mum, if it will be helpful to show the route of the pipeline.
That actually would be very helpful.
Yeah.
If I take this, I'll make sure that it's on the examination website and everybody can interrogate it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So it's a substantial investment by Southern Water, obviously, to address the serious problems which were obviously occurring in Sutton, Scotland. But like I say, they've been progressing work now to a stage where obviously they are testing the pipeline, and they've got it in the next, obviously, this financial plan to do the necessary works at South Wonston. And then obviously, like I say, from South Wonston, it will go to the Hairstock pumping treatment station.
Okay, so I'm looking here. I've got the route of that pipe. And what does this letter say, please? Is this anything that I haven't seen before?
The letter just confirms obviously the substantial progress that's been made in terms of obviously the pipeline, and obviously where things are in terms of obviously the pipeline progress, and obviously what work is undertaken. Basically, predominantly it's Grattan Close and Sadler's Close in Sutton, Scotland.
Okay.
Also, perhaps, Ma'am, just worth noting that in the statement of common ground with Southern Water, page 14, it's not paragraph number, but page 14, there's reference to what they describe as the second project, which is the upgrading the receiving sewer network in the Hairstock sewer catchment, which is said will be delivered as a business priority early in the next water industry financial plan period of 2025 to 2030. So I don't think it's right to say that the aim is 2030. The aim is early in the period 2025 to 2030.
Okay, thank you for the reference there.
If it's helpful to the inspector, we've got a latest email from Southern Water, which we're happy to share with you. It says the last update I have was flows were being passed forward from the new pumping station at Grattan Close, this in Sutton, Scotland. It is a temporary starters and generators, and it is a service. The pumping station is on schedule for the end of May this year for removal of the temporary operating equipment, and a new Sadler's Close pumping station is being forecast for the completion of end of June. That's just literally the up-to-date information we got from them.
Okay, thank you so you've all heard that evidence, and we'll translate that over to our discussion on Sutton Scotney. We're in South Wonston at the moment.
So you answered my question in the sense that we're going to cover it again under Sutton Scotney,
Okay.
so that's fine.
Okay, is there anything else that anyone wishes to say on South Wonston? Yes, please. I'm sorry, I can't see your nameplate.
It's Guy Wakefield, from Beechcroft, and we are actively promoting the site of South Wonston that we're discussing today, Ma'am. Just to thank Mr. Fox for further clarification in relation to the wastewater issues. As you said, you'll find those references in Appendix 1 of the Statement of Common Ground, where there are a couple of other references that are quite helpful in terms of the timings and the priority nature of the work to be undertaken in relation to those wastewater upgrades, particularly for South Wonston and Harestock. We, as Beechcroft Land, have no intention of delaying the submission of application. We'd like to work actively with the council and indeed with the parish council to bring forward an application at the earliest opportunity, whether that be an outline application or a detailed application. But we don't see any at this stage, given the speedy nature at which Southern Water are pushing things forward. We'd like to be working that application up as quickly as possible, subject to those works being completed, etc. Just one final point from me in relation to the point that the parish council made in relation to the detailed nature of the policy. Experience says to me, Ma'am, that the level of detail in the policy is currently sufficient for us to have a full understanding of what's required for any future application. And indeed, clearly, as you'll be aware, Ma'am, the application process will allow us to understand even more in relation to what the consultees are expecting of us in relation to educational contributions, etc., etc. So we feel the policy is currently suitably worded. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't need any further help on that policy. Let's move on to Sutton Scotney, and this is a settlement where you're suggesting a new allocation for 60 dwellings. So in association with Windfall, that gives a suggested total of 80. Now, the number of the concern, well, there are a number of concerns, but first of all, this settlement, it's outside the existing settlement boundary. It's divided by the A30. Now, I want the council to explain to me how the potential for that to be a barrier in its relationship and integration of that site into the settlement. How is that going to be overcome? What assurance can you give me on that?
Yes, thank you, Ma'am. So although the land at Brightlands SU01 lies beyond the existing settlement boundary and north of the A30, we don't think it severs the allocation from the village. The allocated development will provide safe vehicle, pedestrian and cycle access links to the site across the A30 in accordance with the policy and policy T3. We also think that the inclusion of a pedestrian crossing and also the new vehicular access around the roundabout would have the added benefit of slowing down traffic speeds along that road. And the inclusion of the pedestrian crossing has been confirmed by Carter Jonas, who are here today in their Reg 19 comments. And we believe that this measure supports the aims of policy SP1 by facilitating a sustainable extension to the settlement of Sutton Scotney, now that the critical infrastructure that we've just spoken about in the sewage pipeline have been addressed. And we believe that the allocation of the site at Brightlands does accord with the policy SP1.
Okay, now I'll go on site, but what are the traffic conditions on that road? What is the speed? Ambient speed of traffic, what's the speed limit?
Speed limit is 40, ma'am, along that road.
What are general traffic conditions? I'm going to go on site anyway, but
I'm not aware of the.
I think if I can help, obviously, traffic, you'll see when you go out on site, traffic does come along there. I've not observed, obviously, high speed traffic. And as my colleague Beth has said, obviously, part of the access arrangement, which basically would be basically a roundabout off the kind of existing junction there, you can see on the right hand side, that would help to slow traffic down, I think, basically, in terms of basically where the traffic comes along. And obviously, traffic speeds were obviously deemed to be an issue. Obviously, our colleagues at Hampshire would obviously amend the speed limit.
what's it Hampshire? What
They haven't raised an objection to this side.
Okay, and sorry, where is the suggested crossing point?
Well, we haven't identified obviously the natural flows is obviously to go down where the amenities are, which basically are down Oxford Road, etc.
Okay.
But obviously you've got the roundabout there, so you need to put it need to obviously where people are obviously slowing down to the roundabout.
Okay, has the implications of any highway works there, and they would be highway works in that been taken into account in terms of character and appearance of the locality? What would they be? Would it be
Thank you. It's my mum's. It's
I think it could be a pleasure. We haven't seen the actual details. Obviously, Waits may want to speak more in detail what they've done in terms of traffic modelling. But like I say, I think it would be obviously what you don't want is too much of an urbanisation feel to the settlement itself. So basically, it needs to be dealt with sensitively.
Okay. What about the other? There are lots of constraints on this site. Let's speak first of all about flooding and drainage.
Yes, we have the local lead flood authority here as well to talk about flooding on the site.
Okay.
That was also the added criterion of the hydrogeological assessment on the site. So I'll pass it.
Yes, so in very similar way as we'd mentioned on the earlier site, there is an indication of an overland flow route running through the site. It is identified as low risk, so it's about making sure that any development on that site is a suitable layout to allow the continuity of that flow path to continue. There are also constraints on the periphery of the site. We do have main rivers running to the southeastern side, and there is flood zone associated with that. But this is right on the edge of the site. So again, through an appropriate layout and making sure that any built development is outside of those areas, we felt that it could be accommodated.
And I mean, it's quite a large site, isn't it?
It is.
Quite a large site. Do you know what that density is? You're suggesting 60. Just it's possible that somebody else around the table would have that answer to hand. But okay, and thank you for that. We've spoken about drainage, and what you're saying to me is that that is going to be addressed very shortly. Archaeology, please.
Thank you, ma'am. The policy set out in the proposed local plan has a criteria requiring for archaeological investigations on the site and consideration of the issues thereon in terms of mitigation through either further archaeological work or design if that was necessary. The comments from Historic England at the Reg 19 stage have reinforced that archaeology needs to be considered carefully on the site as potentially important remains could be present. However, further to that, the site promoter has commissioned a detailed archaeological assessment of the site, which I have reviewed, and in my professional view, for a number of reasons, which I will expand on if you wish to hear, I think that the archaeological potential of the site is likely to be quite a bit lower than has been previously stated. And I can expand on that if you wish.
No, that's fine. Thank you for that. Anything, could somebody speak to biodiversity and whether there are any constraints or impacts?
We're not aware of any impacts. Basically, there's agricultural land. There's obviously 2 residential properties in the middle of it, but we're not aware of anything significant on the site. But what I will say is obviously the site is quite large. To pick up on obviously any B&G, archaeological issues, any SUDs, drainage issues, and also to respect the character of the village as well, because we don't want this as like a little mini housing estate that kind of is totally out of character with the village. We want it basically a loose-knit development. There is opportunities at the front of the site to deal with the SUDs and open space and creating that attractive, obviously, development.
Okay, what about noise? It's just off the A34 there.
Yes, that's right, Mum. I think, again, it comes back to the design process and the fact that it's allocated for 50 to 60 dwellings on such a large site. This can be mitigated through the design process, and there's a criterion in there for a noise assessment to be undertaken as well.
Okay, I see that. That's a criteria 16. Okay, yes. Let me, I know that some people around the table will want to make comment on that. Sorry, would you mind turning your South Wonston Parish Council, please? What did I say?
Yeah. Oh, do you want the next door?
I'm sorry. Right. Wonston Parish Council. Sorry.
Thank you. I prepared answers. I would like first to quickly address erroneous comments that Adrian made in respect of consultation, if that's possible. There were not numerous meetings, as Adrian suggested. Following the Regulation 18, where we had no allocation, the Chair of Planning and the Chair of the Parish Council were invited to a meeting where Adrian said that there would be an allocation made. The Parish Council then wrote to Adrian on the 18th of April, specifically saying that residents needed time to consider any change included in the Regulation 19 because they needed to think about what was possible. We never got a reply to the letter. We were invited to a further meeting on the 26th of April, where Adrian noted that despite further delays with the sewage pipeline because of flooding, he felt it was safe to make an allocation. At that meeting, he noted archaeological issues identified at Brightlands and that he was therefore now looking at Dairy Field, the alternative site. We were then called to a further meeting on the 11th of July when we were told there would be an allocation of 60 homes at Brightlands, and that was 8 days before the Regulation 19 was published. So we knew 8 days before it. After speaking at the Cabinet on the Cabinet meeting on the 29th of July, the Chairman of the Parish Council spoke. She was advised by Martin Todd, leader of the council, to consult residents and that the results would be considered. We did consult residents. We invited both developers to 2 meetings. Waits chose not to attend, but supplied us with a report which had previously been given to Winchester, but we had never seen. The whole report is based on the premise of developing 120 homes, not 60, on the site. We consulted with residents. 62% said building at Brightlands would lead to a village of two halves. 83% thought noise and air pollution were important considerations for any new housing. And 71% thought that the alternative site, Dairy Field, would be better at reducing the carbon footprint and retaining the village identity. As we noted in the Regulation 19 response, there is no safe crossing point on the A30. We had previously consulted with Hampshire about a footpath near the roundabout and been told it was far too dangerous because of the poor sight lines. And I've submitted that in evidence to the Regulation 19. New residents would be cut off from the rest of the village and reliant on cars. As you've said, the site has more constraints than any other in the market town and rural development allocations. Waits, I do not think, have been asked to produce a viability report on the site in light of those and in light of the fact that it is an allocation for only 60 homes. Waits have consistently referred to 100 or 120 homes, not the 60. They've implied to us verbally, or they've actually said to us verbally, to the Chair of Planning, that the site's not viable without a larger allocation or less affordable housing. This is the only type of housing the village actually needs. Why was a site viability report not requested by Winchester when they requested one for the alternative site? And that was produced and submitted to them before the Regulation 19 allocation, which seems inconsistent and unfair. Residents need the security of knowing that any new development will be able to provide much needed affordable housing. There's no guarantee that the Brightlands site would produce the affordable housing if the site isn't viable at the number that has been allocated to it. Southern Water haven't met any of their previous deadlines, and the letter that Adrian's just referred to at the bottom says we'll make the site operational in April, May 2025. Well, they haven't yet, which will reduce the use of tankers. It won't stop tankers, and we have other sites in the village where waste is already being tankered every week or twice a week. So there will still be tankers escorting waste products around the village, even when the pipeline operates, because the groundwater levels have led to it not being as successful as it was deemed to be. They told us this 6 years that full tankering has been going on. They told the parish council 5 years ago that it would end, then that it would end 5 years ago, and it hasn't. There are also private systems that are failing or will fail the new EA standards. Residents are angry that the new development may be allowed to join the pipeline while their own applications to join it are delayed, and there are concerns whether there will be sufficient capacity because, as South Wanson said, the capacity has had to be reduced, and at times the pressure is going to be less than was originally promised. There are issues with the high water table, which have led to Southern Water now saying that some tankering will still be needed. We feel that the policy SU01 should state that no development of any kind should commence until the Southern Water pipeline is fully functioning and has proven capacity for all current residents of Sutton Scotney and the additional dwellings. And in a point that's just been raised about having access to the roundabout in respect of flooding, the flooding infrastructure for the village is already underneath that roundabout, and adjacent to it is the Bogmore Sump. You can't make the roundabout bigger without affecting the current flooding prevention measures. And if you run a road down to that roundabout, because the Brightlands site is raised, the water will naturally run down to the roundabout that is in the flood zone.
Okay, thank you very much, Wonston Parish Council. Mr. Parker?
Well, thank you very much indeed for giving me this opportunity to speak. You have, I know, already read my representation, which sadly ran to 17 pages, and I do apologise for that. By good luck, I've reached the age of 78 years, armed only with common sense and 1 GCE O-level. But along the way, I have picked up some skills, which do include risk management, risk identification, and lots of other things. So I really just want to talk now because I know we're running out of time. There was a lot more I wanted to say, but let's just look at the A30. The A30 is a very strange road. You could go there, and you will go there on your site visit, and you'll park up and you'll think, well, this is a quiet road. There's nothing coming along here. And there may not be for 2 or 3 minutes. But then there will be convoys of vehicles coming from each way because all the traffic has been held up by HGVs, tractors, combine harvesters, or whatever. And we do know from a traffic count that there are several thousand cars and over 200 HGVs use that road every day. But, and here is the killer here, this road is unique because if you were able, and you're lucky, you can't go back 55 years as I can, Sutton Scotney was a major traffic intersection. Everything going north, south, east, west went through Sutton Scotney. And then the A303 was put in and the A34 was put in, which relieved that problem. But now technology is not such a good thing because what happens is if there is any problem on the A34 or the A303, everybody sat nav kicks in and says, look how clever I am. We'll all go off here. And within 5-10 minutes of a problem on either of those roads, we are gridlocked. Now, that is not going to aid people getting from Brightlands across the A30 into the village. So I'm not going to labour the point, but there are lots of difficulties with this site. I mean, I can elaborate on what Waits say they're going to do, and then I will tell you why it's not possible. But the other thing is, if we just look at the two sites, I'm not a great fan of methodology, but I know you have to use it, but it's a tool. So let's look at the methodology for the two sites and then apply common sense to those. So broadly speaking, the methodology, the IIA was pretty much similar. Brighton scored higher on one thing and Wanstone Road scored higher on something else, but there's not a lot to choose between them. But then if you apply common sense, you say, right, what have we got up at Brightlands? Well, we've got a landlocked site. Now, this is contrary to anything which Winchester Council has said or which Waste have said. There is no public right of way on the western boundary. Well, there is, but you can't use it because that public right of way got cut in two by the A34 in 1981 and nobody has been able to use it since. It's totally overgrown. So to say, for Waits to say, we're going to put a dropped curb up there to allow the two public rights of way to be connected is total nonsense. The other problem is, if people live on Brightlands and they want to get to the post office, the quickest way is to go on the north side of Stockbridge Road, past the old railway embankment, and to the post office. But there's not space there for a footpath. There is absolutely not. So what you have to do, and I do this every day, I come out my drive, I cross the A30 carefully, I go down, I cross the Oxford Road carefully, I then recross the A30 carefully, I pick up my newspaper, I come back over the A30, back over Oxford Road, and back over the A30. That's 6 roads I've crossed to go to the post office. The post office is a banking hub now. It's a return centre for parcels. It's getting busier and busier all the time. So if anybody is living on Brightlands, they're not going to cross the road. They're going to take a car. And that's the other thing. Sutton Scotney is not a sustainable development. There is no employment. Everybody needs a car to get to work. So whether it's 60 houses, which be a minimum of 120 cars, or 120 houses, 240 cars, you need the cars. They will go through the village every day. It's not cutting down on carbon. It's a total nightmare. And there's so much more I could say, and I would be very happy to answer any questions about Waite's plan for what they want to do, but I'm conscious I'm wasting your time.
Thank you very much. Could I turn to Turley, please?
Thank you. Simon Packer, Turley on behalf of Hather Property. So I won't repeat many of the information that the Parish Council has just presented, which I think is helpful. It just one or two things to add to the matter statement, if I may, and the Reg 19 representations. So I think first and foremost, we do feel that there is a conflict and tension with regards to the policy SP1, as you've identified, and the severance caused by the A30. SP1 is a fundamental policy within the plan. It's part of the vision and objectives. There are three main strands to it: high quality development, inclusive development, and development being focused around sustainable travel modes. So I would add to that policy SP2. There are two criteria in particular that are relevant here. Criteria 6, which talks about making use of public transport, walking and cycling safe and accessible, and integrating development with existing jobs, services and facilities to reduce car use. And secondly, criteria 9, which talks about contributing to individual and community well-being, health and safety and social inclusivity. So I think both of those are significant, and I think quite pointedly, this is the only allocation where you have asked this question with regard to the consistency with policy SP1. So I just highlight that. I'm just picking up on, in that context, picking up on the road severance in particular, if I may. So yes, A30, to give you a bit more information on traffic levels, that's set out within our matter statement. You'll have that. The parish council have alluded to it as well. Yes, it is a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit currently. I would ask you again, a not too dissimilar point that's been made already, when you are out on site, please do make sure you are there ideally during the peak hour periods, because as the parish council's mentioned, there are differences in flow during the day. The second point that I think is relevant, again, it's covered within the matter statement, is Hampshire Local Transport Plan has a policy that does discourage new accesses onto the A30. They're only really permitted in exceptional circumstances. I do appreciate there is an arm to the roundabout that could be added here. And thirdly, perhaps more significantly, we've heard reference to Hampshire County Council highways and the fact that it's claimed that they have raised no comments. Now, we don't quite know what that means. We have seen reference within the, and this is within the site selection paper for Sutton Scotland, there's reference to pre-app response from Hampshire County Council, which indicates no objection. We've not seen that. In fact, where the parish council have evidence to suggest that is not the case. So we would just question the validity of points being made around Hampshire County Council's response to this allocation and the evidence that's been presented. Now, just final point. So obviously the mitigation option is a safe, is a pedestrian crossing. We don't know what form that's going to take. I think what's been alluded to by Mr. Fox is something quite formal, signalised potentially. Again, we would welcome clarification from Hampshire County Council, if there is any, as to what form that would take. What I would say is that two things. One, if that's a signalised crossing with your usual barriers to assist with pedestrian safety, that is going to be an urbanising influence on this part of the village. I also feel that it isn't in itself, well, 2 points. One, it's interesting that that is required. It's the proportionality really of that being required in the context of an allocation for 55 to 60 units. It's quite an extensive intervention in my view. And secondly, I don't think it will help, of course, we accept that, but I don't think it necessarily avoids the likelihood of people using their cars to access facilities in Sutton Scotland. I did have some more points about constraints, but just conscious I might leave that there because others might want to comment on it.
Are they points that are in your reps?
There's just one or two additional points. Shall I make them now?
Yeah, just quickly.
So, first of all, flooding and drainage. Now, I think I mentioned this last week. There is updated evidence that was produced earlier this year from the Environment Agency on flood risk, surface water and fluvial flooding. And I think that's important because when you look at the consequences of that updated evidence, you will see that as far as surface water flooding is concerned, it is essentially removed from the alternative site, the Wanston Road site. If I can, I appreciate you don't want to get into the detail of emission sites, but I think it's important because flood risk was one of two key constraints identified by the council, and this is all set out in the site selection paper for Sutton Scotney. Two key constraints that led to the conclusion that Brightlands was the preferred site. Now, if those circumstances have changed, and we believe they have, then that does question the evidence base that that decision was based on, which is set out, as I say, within the site selection paper for Sutton Scotney and indeed the integrated impact assessment. So that was flood risk. Just in terms of noise, so I would draw attention in particular to paragraph 4.291 of the integrated impact assessment. So that's SDO2A. So that does set out on page 301, and I will quote briefly, potential negative effects identified on residential sites that could be avoided by selecting sites outside of air and noise pollution hotspots should be used as a matter of principle. So again, it begs the question, have the council come to the right conclusion in that respect? And again, there's another related point that relates to the integrated impact assessment scoring, which again is set out in the matter statement. We don't know at this stage the implications of the levels of noise, other than they do exist. And when you consider this in the light of constraints related to flood risk, constraints related to archaeology, constraints related to noise, we would just question again the point that was made previously about viability and land use and whether or not this can actually work as a suitable, justifiable allocation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Waits, please.
Thank you, Mum. I don't know how many of those things you would actually like me on behalf of Waits to respond to. You have in our written reps technical information to demonstrate that it is deliverable. The site is sound. Nothing we've heard suggests that it's unsound. There are things that may need to be managed and mitigated through the development process, as with any other site. Waits, through its technical consultants, is in consultation with Hampshire Highways. The access point is being modelled. The crossing point is being modelled. These are in the layout that I submitted with the hearing statement. And the site has capacity for 120 houses. That's the use, that's an appropriate use of the land and an efficient use of the land to help meet the housing needs of the local authority. That's the premise upon which it's been set out. And I think that the testing and the work that Waits have done has been based on that. So it knows that it can deliver landscaping, green space, the other requirements of plan making, of good planning on the site with more houses. Testing has been done on noise. The output of that is reflected in the in that design that you can see. And I think the only other point to touch on very quickly is the viability comments. The council's own viability evidence demonstrates that the site's deliverable. Waits believes the site is deliverable. I wasn't at the meeting where it may have been mentioned previously, but my suspicion is that that was at a time when elements like nutrient neutrality played a much higher, had a much higher impact on viability, and post the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, that's no longer an issue. So that's not going to impact the viability of the site. The site can be delivered, and it will be a site that's well connected to the services and facilities of Sutton Scotney. We've got the scheme and the layout, the existing footpaths, and even the public right of way that can be included within the settlement, within the scheme, excuse me, that will connect with what's already in the village. It is a sound allocation, and it can be delivered through the development management process.
Okay, I heard what you said about viability. You're promoting a greater number than is suggested in this allocation. What's your viability evidence saying in relation, and now I know what the council is saying, but what's your saying in relation to 60 dwellings, which is what is in this plan?
It's viable, yes. It is.
Sorry.
It is viable.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let me turn to the council, please, and I want you to focus on, first of all, what your viability evidence has said.
Well, we've done local plan viability at every stage of the plan making process. Obviously, we've grouped together sites, Sticks and Cell partnership that you'll hear from later in early June. Actually, that's the process that they've gone. They've obviously not assessed individual sites. That would just be far too onerous and not proportionate to obviously the job in hand. So they've grouped together con sites, etc. But you'll hear from them obviously on the local plan viability work. Like I say, it's encouraging to hear that obviously what we've allocated it for is viable and deliverable.
Okay, heard what you said. The point that was made on Hampshire County Council, and I know that they've said they've got no objection, and we've heard from Waits that they're working with Hampshire County Council. What's your understanding there, please?
But the only thing I will say is obviously if they'd got an objection to this site, it would have been in the Reg 19, and clear. And we have obviously regular meetings with Hampshire, and they've not raised this as an issue with us. And obviously, if they had got an issue, we would have had a statement of common ground with Hampshire, and we haven't got one, which to me indicates there is no issue.
Okay, what's your answer to the updated Environment Agency mapping? Whoever's most appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, so the Environment Agency mapping has recently been updated. The initial comment was provided based on the previous mapping, but it also took into a consideration the historical flooding records that we have on the system, which is separate to the modelling. And we are aware of flooding issues running through Sutton Scotney. The other thing is the mapping deals with fluvial and surface water matters. It's groundwater that is my primary concern to the south of the village, which was why I'd raised those points in relation to the southern site. And we also have historic evidence that groundwater emergence has sat in that land, which could constitute quite a barrier to an appropriate layout being developed for that site.
So what? So what are you saying in relation to that updated evidence, the EA mapping?
Yes.
Does it change anything for you?
It doesn't really.
In relation to this site?
There is a slight reduction in the overland flow routes that have been identified, but they are still in existence. But it is on a low flood risk for the area north of the A30. And it's quite a narrow band, so that's why we felt it could be addressed through appropriate layout.
Okay. Now, this point that's been made, obviously the sewage connection is a concern for everyone. The suggestion was made, is there anything in your policy that assures us that the proposals that I've got here from Southern Water are going to be fully functioning at their full capacity before development?
Yes, I can provide a further update. We have covered this in our policy, but I have just received an email from the strategic planning lead at Southern Water, and just in relation to the tankers comment that was made, and to give some reassurance, the Grattan Close pumping station is currently operational with no tankers, and the Sadler's Close pumping station is on schedule for July to be operational, although they note that they are still tankering from that site. And in connection to new drainage connections, the scheme is sufficient to meet the needs arising from the allocated site and that of existing properties. And we've had that.
Sorry, what you're saying, it is the whole village, not just.
Yes.
Can I just clarify that, because I know it's an issue from the parish council perspective. There's a lot of private treatment plants in basically Sutton Scotney. So the work that Southern Water did in terms of basically sizing the pipe that goes from Sutton Scotney to South Wanston, obviously I think it assumed, I think from memory about it was over 100 dwellings. But what it didn't do was taking those properties that are on private facilities to connect to the pipeline. Now, Southern Water have said that if a private pumping kind of system is failing, people can go down the process of applying, and I've forgotten the terminology, to actually apply to Southern Water to connect to it, the pipeline itself. But obviously that's a separate process that would need to be followed. And I do appreciate, obviously, the parish council would like, obviously, everybody off, obviously a private sewage treatment package works. But obviously those people did buy those properties with that in mind. I didn't force them to buy a property with obviously that thing. That would have been a legal pack. So they were fully aware of that when they bought those properties.
Okay, but that's been taken into account. That has been taken into the capacity that would be required has been taken into account in Southern Water's modelling.
The capacity for the new build, obviously, that has been taken into account. But like I say, the capacity to convert everybody who's on a private system to connect to the pipeline is not going to be possible, basically. But obviously, if it's failing, then Southern Water have a statutory duty to basically connect to the pipeline.
I understand. Thank you for that clarification. Wait.
Sorry, Mum, that just reminded me of something I was going to say about the sewage capacity, so I do apologise. It was that with the wording in the text and what we've just heard, is there a tension or could there be more clarity in that if Waits and the developer work with Southern Water and there is a solution prior to 2030, that development could commence? There's comment of in communication, or whatever the right word is. I'm trying to look at some text there. So if that happens to be before 2030, that could be acceptable, because I think the point was made over here that if the application comes in 2030, delivery in 2031 is going to be a challenge. Well, that's not the intention of Waits. The intention of Waits is to put the application in much sooner than that. And I'm not going to go over H2, but I think there's the potential for that this could be delivered sooner than.
Okay, but are you which criteria are you referring?
This I was looking at the proposed main modifications, and I think in policy at I can't see the number for the mod, MM83.
Yeah.
And it's criterion 5, 6, 17, and its occupation of development will be phased to align with delivery of water infrastructure upgraded at the various places in consultation with the service provider. And in the supporting text, which is further up in the same box, it talks about that the delivery plan that we've already heard about, which is 25 to 2030. So either in the supporting text or in the policy criterion, there could be some acknowledgement that it might be before 2030 if that consultation with the service provider was positive.
Council?
Can we just very quickly respond to that? Yes, I mean, the policy requires alignment. That doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a restriction. It's just that the two have to be thought about together and a suitable approach adopted.
Sorry, where does it say alignment, please?
It's policy in Little Roman 17.
Yes.
Occupation and development will be
To
phased
align,
to
yeah,
align
I
with.
see it, I see, yeah. Okay, thank you. I don't need any more help on that. Mr. Parker, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Very briefly, two things I didn't mention because I was rushing, I was conscious of the time. First thing, zero community engagement on this policy.
Yes, I've got
Contrary to the
that point.
MPPF. And the other thing is that all the facilities that people will wish to use in the village, particularly if they're on foot, are on the east side of Oxford Road. So therefore, if there's a development of Brightlands, everybody's got to cross the road on foot or whatever, over the A30, cross the Oxford Road. Whereas if there's development on the alternative site in Wanston Road, even the children don't have to cross a road to get the school bus, because the school bus comes right along Wanston Road and all the facilities are accessible safely. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parker. I've got those points. Wanston Parish Council.
Very quickly to pick up on things that have been said. On viability, if Winchester have assessed all the sites, why did they ask Wanston Road to produce a viability report at their own expense and not ask Waits?
Okay.
On flooding, it's groundwater issues at Sadler's Close that have caused the delay in the most recent delay in the pipeline, because the hole they built to do the work was completely full all winter. Tankers, in the previous letter, Southern Water have confirmed that Sadler's Close will always require tankers in extreme weather being 3 months so far already this year. And the private sewage issues are primarily in the new developments, the small new developments in Sutton Scotney, where Winchester passed planning permission for units that have proved to be too small and have failed too quickly, which is why residents are so angry. They bought new homes with new systems, and 15 years down the line, all their waste is being tankered away.
Thank you. Is there anything else that anyone wishes to say? Turleys, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm conscious of the time. I'll be brief. 3 quick points, if I may. Just firstly, picking up on the constraints and the viability. So I think it's fairly self-evident when you look at the allocation and the number of criteria, the number of constraints, the number of additional bits of information that are required and infrastructure potentially that's required, that it seems strange to me, as alluded to by the parish council, that a client site we were asked to do a viability assessment. I would have thought this was the one site that would have where there would have been a requirement for a viability, given that level of those constraints. The other point was, again, it goes back to consultation, which I won't go through in detail. It's just simply that had the parish council had a better understanding of the level of constraints of this site from the outset, and that been the focus of the engagement process, as I mentioned last week and as detailed on the matter statement, we think that there would have been a different conclusion with regard to the preferred site. The second point just relates to groundwater flooding, just picking up on something that the representative from the LLFA mentioned. As far as we're aware, both sites are subject to groundwater flooding issues. I think the suggestion was that it just related to the site to the south. It's fairly self-evident, again, when you look at the criteria within the policy allocation that requires a hydrogeological assessment. That is because of the groundwater issues, as far as I'm aware. So I think that was the point on flood risk. And then finally, we are hearing quite a bit today about additional evidence or alleged evidence in relation to archaeology, in relation to highways. Why wasn't this considered at an earlier stage in the process? Again, given the significance of the constraints, it's important from your perspective that you have an idea of the, from a soundness perspective, that all of these matters have been considered in detail. I don't think you have. And even today, listening around the table to inputs that have been made on the other side, I still don't think we're any clearer. We've got a steer, but we don't know the detail. And I think that's important when you think about capacity. I think it's important when you think about viability as well. So those were the 3 quick points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone for all your contributions. That was a very helpful session for me. So that matter is finished. Can I turn to the council, please? We're starting back again at 2 o'clock. I'm conscious that it's actually only ourselves who are attending. I just want to canvass the idea of starting a little bit later.
Very pleased to hear you say that.
So shall we say, I don't want to keep everyone too long. It's likely to be a shorter session. So should we say a 2:30 start?
Or even 2:15.
2:15.
We can do 2:15. 2:15 is, I think, adequate rather than give us 3/4 of an hour.
Okay. I'm easy. 2:15, and we'll put something on the website to tell people that will commence again at 2:15. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. This hearing session's closed.